morning, or good afternoon, depending on where you are.
Hey.
I'm waiting for a few more people to get in, and then I think we'll get started. I apologize for the delay that we've had this morning. We had a little bit of technical difficulties. As you can imagine, a good part of our speakers are actually dialing in from overseas, and so we've had a little bit of a glitch there, but we should be ready to come in now. So we're really happy. I'm Janine Scott. I'm the chairman of the Constituency for Africa. And Mel and I are very happy that you're able to join us for this conversation this morning. We want to have kind of a different discussion today. Oftentimes we look at trade and investment in Africa from a US perspective. We look at the opportunities, we look at the resources that are available. We tend to focus a lot on USG initiatives, programs, agencies, etc. But we've seen that there's an increase in the number of African diasporans who are going back to, returning to, or living on the continent of Africa. And they have decided that they would face the challenges, take on the opportunities, they take them head on. And they're successfully living in Africa and operating successful businesses on the continent. So today we want to hear from them. We want to know what drove them. We want to know how they've achieved their successes. We want to know if there's any tips they would give to others of us who may be looking to do similar kinds of things. We have a very esteemed and experienced set of speakers that we've brought to you this morning. And we're looking forward to hearing from them. Now, we had expected to have our head of state, Mr. Hage Gangab, this morning. As you can often imagine with heads of state, there are last minute things that come up, so he won't be able to join us. But we are honored to have our sister, Rosa Whitaker, one from our own community, who is with us, and she will be bringing us remarks very shortly. I'm sure that many of you know Rosa. She is quite esteemed in her own right. She's a passionate champion for creating enterprise solutions to address poverty and to promote prosperity across Africa. She's recognized as one of the world's experts on African trade and investment. As a key architect of the U.S. African Growth and Opportunity Act, while serving as a senior staff member in the U.S. House of Representatives, Rosa spearheaded a revolution in U.S.-African economic relations. AGOA continues to be the centerpiece of U.S.-Africa economic policy and has contributed towards real and inclusive growth by creating billions of dollars in expanded trade in Africa and employment for millions of African people. After successful service as a career diplomat in the U.S. Department of State, in 1997, Rosa became the first ever Assistant U.S. Trade Representative for Africa. It was then a new position established by President Bill Clinton, and it was the critical representation of the expanded and diversified policy towards Africa pioneered by that administration. She's presently the president and CEO of the Whitaker Group, which is a leading transaction advisory, investment, and project development firm which specializes in Africa. She founded it in 2003. And since inception, the Whitaker Group has been the firm of choice for many multinational corporations that are investing and expanding market share in Africa in ways that achieve both commercial and human development dividends. She has offices in Washington, D.C. and in Accra, Ghana. And she's helped to deliver several billions of dollars in projects and investments across Africa. It makes its own direct investments now as well in Africa, such as the 2017 acquisition of significant shares and management control of Dominion TV, which is a Pan-African multimedia network based in Accra. In 2018, Rosa also became the president of Mercy Ships while simultaneously maintaining a position on its international executive board of directors. With that and all of the experience and the passion that she brings to Africa, let me ask for Rosa to help us set up for this morning.
First of all, Janine, can everyone hear me? Mel and Janine, I want to just thank you for this gathering. It really does feel like a reunion. And I'm very pleased to be here and to have this discussion with you. And I would like to see it as a discussion. So I'll share a few thoughts, and I look forward to addressing any questions and just engaging, because we are critically, we're at a critical moment, facing a consequential election. I think the most consequential election in the United States in our lifetime. We have 18 elections across Africa over the next 2 years, presidential elections. So if there was ever a time to act, to look at how we can impact the policies, how we can make things happen economically, from a business perspective, I think is now, because it is a moment of change. Regardless what happens, change is definitely assured. And regardless of what happens, the reason why I'm so encouraged about the ability of a few people coming together to make something big happen is because of what happened with the African Growth and Opportunity Act. I mean, the greatest lesson, and I will say that that could not have happened without the Constituency for Africa, which led the grassroots civil society movement that got AGOA done. And we were facing a critical moment at that time. I mean, Mel, you will remember Senator Jesse Helms and many other senators told us that AGOA was dead on arrival. It took nearly 5 years to do. We even had people in the development community that would usually be with us that weren't with us, because they said expanding trade would be a ploy to get rid of Africa's aid. And so we faced a lot of challenges, but despite the circumstances that at that time no trade law had passed, despite all of those challenges, we prevailed. And my message this morning is that if we develop, we don't even need everybody to agree on everything, but a critical mass of us that decide to move something forward, I believe that we will prevail again. So just in terms of an overview of myself, you've given an introduction, but one of your questions was the mistakes that I've made in business and how I recovered. And my key.
Rosa, you hit your mic accidentally. You accidentally muted.
Okay. All right. Okay. So first of all, I would say that the key to doing business is really to make it about a calling. And that's what Africa was for me. It's always been a calling. And I think for people who want to do it for money, for people who want to do it out for any other reason besides something that calls you deep down within, it will be very difficult, because I find Africa an exceptionally difficult place to do business. And unless you have that calling that gets you up in the morning and confronting disappointments with optimism, it will just be hard. And I also think, in addition to a calling, there must be a level of competence. And when I say competence, I'm not talking about academic competence. Academic competence is great, but I think that it requires spending a considerable amount of time on the ground, like many of you have done, talking to people, listening and learning that way. And sometimes that can take years. I still have not found a book written about Africa that really deals with the realities on the ground. I haven't found that book. Maybe it exists. Michael Sudakasa, maybe you know about it. Maybe you and Mel will write about it. And so the only way, and I tell young people to really know Africa and learn it, and I'm still learning it, it's a journey, is to spend considerable time there. And what else would I say? In terms of the disappointments and the recovering, I think it's just understanding why you're doing it in the first place. That will keep you going. And also not making assumptions about and being open to the realities that you find. So let me just say, my business was based on a gap, an urgent need. We had just finished passing the African Growth and Opportunity Act, which permitted essentially all goods from Africa into the United States, duty-free, quota-free, and then we took a whole government approach where every organ of government practically, from Department of Transportation to Agriculture to the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, had to come up with an Africa economic strategy. So with that market access combined with trade capacity building and USAID and all of those things that came with the AGOA, including infrastructure and equity funds and OPIC, all of that was included in AGOA. We had created a framework that heretofore had not been done in the United States. But I found a gap because I found that despite that, framework, U.S. investors were not coming into Africa. And despite that, that opening, the trade wasn't happening. And so that's why I created the Whitaker Group to work with companies to help them navigate the markets. And I can say that we have worked in multiple sectors and in just about most of the major investors in Africa, from the Procter & Gamble's to the SAP Millers to the Cargills and the ADMs. And we work with them in a way that we achieve the commercial dividends, but we're also looking for the human and economic development impact. And so I think that AGOA provided this opening, and what I want to just end with to open the conversation with is that we've done AGOA. It has spanned 4 presidencies, but what we've lost is the narrative on AGOA. Every time I hear someone say, well, AGOA hasn't achieved this and that, I really get surprised, because AGOA costs the US taxpayer practically nothing. And when you compare that to what it's delivered, let's take out oil, because people point to oil. AGOA was never going to change the exports of African oil into the US. But what it sought to do is to expand and diversify the US trading relationship with Africa, which it did. Before AGOA, there were probably just a little over $1 billion in non-oil exports from Africa coming into the United States. With AGOA, it has increased nearly threefold to $3.8 billion. And behind that $3.8 billion, there are jobs. In the apparel sector alone, AGOA is supporting nearly 1.4 million jobs in Africa. And these are the kind of jobs that are 85% of those apparel jobs are held by women. And so I think it's had a tremendous, the numbers were so that our labor was not in vain. What people will talk about is what AGOA did not do. I would have liked to have seen more US investment come into Africa as a result of AGOA. That did not happen, and that's largely because there were things we had included in the original bill that we didn't get. And one of those things is tax incentives, US tax incentives for labor-intensive investments in Africa. And this is what I hope will be the bedrock of our new advocacy agenda for Africa. We know that when the US opens up the tax code, it works. We saw that with apartheid in South Africa. One of the greatest US contributions to ending apartheid in South Africa was when Charlie Rangel passed a law that said US companies that remain in apartheid South Africa would be doubly taxed They will have to pay double taxes. And they put spin on it. Maybe some of them left because they hated apartheid, but they didn't leave until that law was passed. So what we have been talking about for some time, and I hope that we can have a harmonized policy in Canada, where it's just to open up the tax code and say for US investors that invest in labor-intensive sectors in Africa, even if we say sectors that don't compete with the US, because there are a lot of sectors. For example, in the US, we do not and cannot grow cocoa, for example. There are so many sectors that we cannot produce apparel very cheaply. There's so many things that can be done in Africa that can't be done in the US. But I think that if we say two things, you invest in Africa, you'll get a development tax credit. And if you invest in Africa, you can repatriate your profits back to the US tax-free. I can tell you we would see those investments in Africa. And I think that that would be one of the best things that we can do economically for the continent, because with that investments comes job creation, education, human and economic development. Now, another thing is the question of where are the investment opportunities? And I think we can see those investment opportunities, but what is required is also patient capital. And so where are the sources of the capital? Because I hear people talking all the time, but they never identify the capital. In our new advocacy framework, which I hope will be a successor to AGOA, I really think that we should really look at opening up the US bond market. I mean, we have never looked at that, and we wouldn't even, and I think Eric and others can tell you, but we have never looked at leveraging the US bond market. It's $40 trillion to provide long-term capital to Africa in infrastructure. And here we can be competitive with the Chinese. And if we look at the Canada's bond market, that's $61 billion. So we're talking about, you know, $40 trillion bond market, $61 billion bond market in Canada, leveraging the bond market to provide long-term capital with very low risk to Africa would be amazingly transformative. And there's also another thing that hasn't been fully exploited in this new advocacy agenda. I think we should also look at pension funds. You know, the kind of money that we have in pension funds, and AID did an experiment on this, Janine. They brought some pension fund managers to Africa, and I counted at least $50 million, no, $70 million that went into Africa as a result. And for a pension fund that, say, with $300 billion under management, that's just rounding off a number. They're not going to really, you know, that's not going to put them at incredible risk. And then there are all kinds of room to have intellectual ferments and financial innovations with that. I think it was Eric who brought up this idea of a diaspora bond. That is one thing that we can look at. And then the problem we've had in the past, we identify the opportunities without identifying the money. And so I think that some of the money could be, because everybody looks for AID money. I mean, I think, Janine, you know, that is just like so many layers of bureaucracy. And that's very complicated. And the money, you got to spend probably $500,000 just to be considered. But when we look at leveraging the bond market, tapping into pension funds, and if the pension fund managers had people, especially in the diaspora, who know the continent, because like I said from the beginning, if there's a good book that can explain Africa to pension fund managers, I like to see it. It doesn't exist in one book. You know it by doing. The knowledge is experiential. And so I think that should be on there. And then there was one other unleft business in AGOA. I am pleased that AGOA is last year $3.8 billion for hardly spending any money. And America has benefited too. Our exports to Africa has grown by 124%. But there are things that we limited in AGOA that we really should open up. And that's, we have what we call tariff rate quotas on sugar, peanuts, and cotton. Now, sugar and cotton, now those are two products that Africa could produce competitively, but they are limited with these tariff rate quotas. So I think that we should really look to get rid of those for Africa. And then I can say that unless we come together and we really reclaim the narrative about AGOA, we won't have anything to build on. I don't think AGOA should remain static. It expires in 2025. I think we should be advocating for something now to build on AGOA. Some people say replace, I say build on it. Some people are saying we should have reciprocal free trade agreements. I don't think that we can have a free trade agreement that will work for Africa in the current form of which these FTAs are drafted. I know US FTAs, and FTAs are really in the US, they are built for, they're not really designed for asymmetrical economies. So unless we can redesign our free trade agreements to be developing country friendly, they won't work. How can we tell, how can we go to a poor country and tell them, get rid of, lower your tariffs to zero so we can bring as much as we want without any duties? Okay, maybe we'll give them a phase-in period, but how would that work? So then are we just delaying the damage for 5 years? So I think that we have to really think about that. The best news, well, some of the best news out of the continent, in my view, is the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, because I've always believed that the balkanization of Africa is one of the main reasons why Africa is poor. We know that in the world, only 3% of the people live in places without access to a border. In Africa, 30% of the people live in places without access to a border. Those markets aren't harmonized unless they come together in some kind of confederation. Infrastructure development will be hard, trade will be hard, inter-African trade will be hard. And so I see the African Continental Free Trade Agreement as a bold new move to do that. And I don't see how you're going to have a free trade agreement with the US until that integration process happens. I'd love to see it, but the devil is in the details. So let me just say that I am confident this morning because of the level of capacity and commitment of the people on this call. And Mel, as you know, with the African Growth and Opportunity Act, every time they said no, we said yes. It took us more than 5 years. Janine, you were there. I mean, it was a fight, but it was a fight that we were prepared to have because we knew we were right. And again, I think with the right advocacy agenda, we can say that we are right again. And Africa needs manufacturing. I see Claude saying that goes beyond cocoa and apparel. And AGOA does go beyond that. A lot of the AGOA trade from South Africa is in the car assembly of cars. And so, and we can incentivize that as well. I agree. Apparel manufacturing is the entry point into manufacturing. I mean, the entry point into industrialization. But to me, the biggest area of success in Africa is certainly with the mobile phones. I mean, nobody thought 650 million Africans would have mobile phones, and in fintech outpaced the United States and Europe. You know, last year in 2019, so it was exactly 456 trillion, actually, well, $456 billion in mobile transactions were made. And that was like, I mean, it was just an incredible, is it for a half a trillion, yes? Or maybe, yeah, a half a trillion. I mean, it's just an incredible number. And when you look at what's happening with fintech, Africa has outpaced the rest of the world. I mean, we had 24 billion transactions on mobile money, generating 456, is that trillion or billion? I mean, it's 456 billion. I'm so optimistic about the fintech revolution across Africa, mobile payments. So I will end and say, we have before us a lot of intellectual ferment, a lot of innovation. Let's unite. We don't have to agree on everything. We just have to agree on a few things, and let's get it done. Thank you so much.
Rosa, thank you so much for that. That was really quite inspiring and very informative as well. And I think it helps to, as you say, a new advocacy agenda is something that we really need to work on and to look forward to. We're going to keep you for just a few minutes for our Q&A, but let me introduce our moderator for this morning. We have none other than Mr. Eric Guichard. He's a good friend of CFA. He is the founder and CEO of Homestrings, and you've mentioned it several times, Rosa, which is a diaspora investment advisory platform. It advises public, private, and multilateral organizations on how to mobilize diaspora capital for investment into public and private projects. And prior to Homestrings, Eric was the founder and chairman of Gravitas Capital, which is an institutional asset management company that he created in 1996. Before this, he was a portfolio manager at the World Bank and served as a technical advisor to sovereign and multilateral institutions. He's a graduate of the University of Dakar, Duquesne University in Pittsburgh, as well as the Harvard Business School, where he earned his MBA and was a World Bank scholar. He serves on several nonprofit boards, including the African Development Bank Steering Committee on Diaspora Investments, the International Organization on Migration Advisory Board on Diaspora Investments, the University of Maryland Center for Financial Policy, and Remit Fund, a diaspora philanthropy platform, and several other private sector boards as well. In 2013, Eric received the Entrepreneur of the Year Award from the London-based African Diaspora Awards for successfully launching Homestrings.com. In 2014, Homestrings received the African Financier of the Year Award from the Association of African-Owned Enterprises, also in the UK. He's been featured in the Wall Street Journal, Forbes Africa, CNBC, Euromoney Magazine, BBC Radio, television, and you can see why we've chosen Eric to be our moderator this morning. He has a great deal of experience and knowledge when it comes to diaspora investing on the continent of Africa. So Eric, let me turn it over to you to have a few Q&As with Rosa.
Thank you very much, Janine, for that introduction. Now I have to live up to all those accolades, which obviously means that I'm going to fail at it, but thank you nonetheless. And again, I want to thank CFA for this tremendous opportunity, and again for this brilliant platform, which has been running for several years, and to which I've been invited as a speaker and now as a moderator. I've been asked to ask a few questions to the incredible Rosa Whitaker. And I mean, you couldn't have had a better kickoff to this kind of discussion. I mean, all the issues were addressed, her opinion, her experience, and then questions have already begun to flow through the chat. So I hope not to disappoint those who are waiting. There's just so much that you've given to us in such a short period of time, Rosa, and there's so much to unpack. And what I want to do in the limited time that was given to me for this Q&A is talk about some of the things that have actually gotten reactions from the crowd. So the first one was this comment you made at the top of your speech about how, quote, exceptionally difficult doing business in Africa is. Can you unpack that a little bit for us and then I have a couple of additional questions.
Okay, thank you so much. Yes, I do find it exceptionally difficult, and I'll tell you why. One is the balkanization that I mentioned. The markets are small. Africa is the most balkanized region of the world. And then I also find that it is difficult because of the corruption. Now, when I talk about corruption, you have to keep in mind, this is coming from the person who would literally, and Mel knows this, I would literally challenge people years ago when they talked about African corruption. I would say, well, India's corrupt, people do business there. Africa was poor before it was corrupt, so maybe the corruption isn't why it's poor. But after spending more time on the ground, if there's anything that has broken my heart in Africa, it is the corruption. And so, and I think it's an incredible tax on the poor. I don't have to preach to the choir, but I think that maybe when you're in an environment with so many people who are poor and so many weak institutions, you can ill afford the corruption. And it is real. And it is so entrenched that people, I find, this is my experience I'm talking about, across the continent. I'm not talking about any one regime or country, but people seem to have the view that there's nothing we can do about it. And they're often replaced with people are like them. So a lot that it just doesn't get done. And so for these reasons, and I think that a lot of the special interest that you would have to attack as an investor, a lot of the special interest is invisible. So when I am working on investment projects, I have to go deep. I have to find out who is behind the blocks to this project. And I have to make an assessment. Can we override them? Can we address it? Or do we give up? And sometimes I just have to come and tell the investor, this one, I don't think we can address. Great project, great metrics, everything lines up, but there's a special interest. Some of them I can fight, some of them I can't. So those are the things that make it incredibly difficult. And the last thing I was gonna add is that, and I think this is for all business leaders, especially in the present and the future, there still in America lacks the ability and an innovative thinking among some to unlock the billions at the bottom. You know, the billions and the, if you wanna make, you know, money and impact in Africa, you have to have a bottom of the pyramid approach. So we know that, you know, by 2060, Africa will have 1.1 billion middle-class consumers. So how you reach those consumers is not like, I had a client that was a large consumer goods company, and they wanted to sell, and they are very, very popular for selling consumer goods, soap powder, dishwashing liquid, at a discounted price in 3 or 4 month supplies. Well, I was just telling them, no, in Africa, let's reduce this. Let's set up depots and reduce this to 3 days, 4 days. And for, you know, that was too much of a departure from their business model. But that's how the spending habits, that's how they are. Largely. In some economies, maybe that would work in Africa because Africa is not a monolith, but largely in the countries we were looking at, to tell a big company that was too much.
Understood. Thank you very much for that. That's, I think it's an important filter throughout the discussion, because we obviously have a group of panelists who have been very, very successful. It'd be interesting to see how they've addressed the issue of corruption. Particularly given that, you know, they still are carrying the American passport, and we do have anti-corruption laws in the U.S., which, you know, can send you straight to, you know, straight to prison if you're caught. So I think it'd be interesting to see how they've dealt with that. I got one more question to you, and I'm debating between your vision for AGOA past 2025 in terms of what that iteration should look like, and then also your own entrepreneurial activity. I see in your bio that you have a media platform. At the same time, together with your husband, you control, or at least guide or shepherd a network of 200 branches, churches in Africa that are seeded out of Ghana. And the combination of those means quite a lot of power. And I'm interested in you talking about what that means. What does media, having a media platform in Africa mean? You talked about the 600 million people who have smartphones. I think Africa is second to Asia in terms of consumption of content. Can you talk about the potential of that media platform that you have? What is your vision there, and how and when or if there is a connection between that and the network of churches that you lead?
Well, it's amazing, and I think this was just a God idea, because I started this off 3 years ago, not knowing very much about media, but we do have a 24/7 Dominion television. We are in all 48 countries on DSTV, and you know that's the region's largest satellite platform. And we're advancing a new genre, which is Christian lifestyle, because being very involved in a church and being in a church where we have about globally 250,000 members, and they're largely in Africa and the African diaspora abroad. So what I noticed, there was this assumption that Christians don't want to know about business and current events and food and fashion. So this is really Africa's first Christian lifestyle network. And I did it because I realized with all of the traveling and speaking that I was doing, that I could reach more people on their smartphones, and I could reach more people on television, because the television viewing audience in Africa is still among the highest in the world. And, you know, smartphones, the OTT market is very large. That I wanted to create a platform for ideas and new thinking, because there has to be a mind shift before I believe there's a leadership shift, a shift in leadership. And so I wanted to bring on some of the brightest minds in the world, in Africa and the world, and put them on a platform to kind of ferment and really get these ideas going. And of course, the foundation of this is my faith. And I do believe that the reason why I've been able to do what I've done, it really is fundamentally attributed to my faith. And I also want to do that. In terms of AGOA, just quickly, I want, first of all, I think we have to debunk the myth that AGOA has not worked. We need to reclaim the narrative. And I can tell you why. I'm not being cynical, but I believe we lost the narrative because there is not any longer any lobbying money in AGOA. So we don't have the apparel importers with us anymore. A lot of the African governments are not really prioritizing AGOA because for some of them, there's no way to eat off of it. I'm very sorry, that is the truth. It's not like some of these Millennium Challenge account and AID projects where they have found ways, and some of these other things. AGOA impacts the poor, working class, largely women, the most vulnerable. And those are the people who don't have a voice on the global stage. So I was surprised even when I go on the Hill now, they said, well, AGOA hasn't worked. I said, who told you it hasn't worked? You think that we can spend for hardly no money and get 1.4 million Africans working in one sector at a living wage, that's not working? And we have women now that can send their girls to school as well as their boys, that we have Mercedes-Benz coming into the US from South Africa and Chryslers. And this is not about killing American jobs. This is trade that's been diverted from Europe. There hasn't been one job that's left America to move to Lesotho in the apparel sector, fruit juice and these things. So my thing is, why don't we build on what's working? And now there's a move, and that's one of the reasons why I've been here, to dilute AGOA's apparel benefits on the Hill. And I've been very active in that, working with Congresswoman Karen Bass and Adrian Espinat, because it's going to, this provision under GSP modernization will not only hurt and kill those apparel jobs it would also hurt Haiti and Central America. So that's the latest fight. So I think we should build on what's working, and I think we should build on it with tax credits and with repatriation of tax, tapping into the bond fund and the pension funds and building on what's working.
Wonderful. Rosa, I've been signaled that my time is up. This has been tremendous. I mean, we can go on for hours on hours just delving into your expertise and an understanding of these intricate problems. I want to thank you again for spending some time with us here. I'm not sure whether you're going to be staying with us or whether I know you have a very busy schedule. Janine, do you want to transition, or would you like me to do the transition?
No, you can go on and carry on, Eric. Thank you again, Rosa. Your insights, as always, your passion that you bring to these issues are just remarkable. So thank you, and we look forward to continuing our engagements together.
And if I can have a word, I just want to congratulate you, Rosa. Also, you're wonderful as always, and you've always been. I've always saw you as the boss, and even when we were, advocating for GOA, I always look to you for guidance, and I continue to look to you for guidance as we try to figure out how we invest and do business on the continent. Thank you very much.
Now, the last thing I want to say is to thank you and Janine, and encourage everybody to continue the support for the Constituency for Africa. You're still standing, and you're standing for a reason. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you again. So as we transition to the panel discussion, just quickly on the logistics, we have two panels, one that will talk about the African-American business experience on the continent, and then I've sort of clustered the two discussion areas. The second area will be about COVID, the impact of COVID on their businesses, and obviously the African Free Trade Agreement and the implications on their business as well. So without further ado, we have a tremendous panel this morning. I will let them introduce themselves so as to not spend too much time. If you can mute, if you're not speaking, if you can mute as a way of eliminating ambient noise, that would be quite helpful. I will simply go through their names and then they will introduce themselves. They each have 2 minutes to talk about what they're doing, who they are. Some have opted to show a 1-minute video as part of their 2-minute allocation in the introduction phase. Following that individual intro, we'll go into a moderated discussion, sort of rapid fire, 2-3 minutes each. I reserve the right to cut people off and move the discussion along the way. The schedule is somewhat tight, but I will try to bring as many of their experiences and points of views into the discussion. So very quickly, we have Dr. Wilmot Allen, founder and CEO of Venture Lift Africa. He's based out of Kenya. Ms. Sheree Mcpherson, co-founder of the Center for Disruptive Technology. She's also an adjunct senior lecturer at the University of Cape Town, South Africa. We have Michael Sudakasa, president and CEO of the African Business Group, also based out of South Africa. Mr. Kofi Anku, CEO of Mercury Estates out of Ghana. And Sheree Robinson, CEO of Taste Masters Africa, I believe also located in Africa. So without further ado, I will let Mr. Kofi Anku kick us off with his 2-minute intro. I'm assuming, if I remember correctly, you have a 1-minute video to show, and then you will have another minute to do a verbal commentary or introduction. I believe we need to give him control so he can share his screen, if I'm not mistaken. Mike, to you, Kofi.
I have his
Eric, how are you?
Good. Please go ahead. Whatever.
Sure, I'll do it. I think I can't share my screen at the moment, so I'm just gonna go into a quick intro.
Well, I think that we have your video. So if Janine has it,
feel free to roll it.
Yeah, she can roll it now, and then you can comment after.
Excellent.
I'm going to play the video.
Okay, great.
Okay, wonderful.
I will mute.
Since your favorite village boy is on a journey to change the narratives of Africa, I know for sure that I've been showing you guys that Africans don't just live on trees. Coming here for the first time, I feel like this is on another level. Yes, indeed, this place is on another level. Kofi, do you think Africa is the future?
Maya, it's the present. It's happening now. What's interesting about this community, and I say community because the emphasis is not simply on the houses, but also the interaction between neighbors and the security that the community provides. There's a 4-bedroom, 3-bedroom. We've got a few 1-bedroom flats that are pretty much sold out.
If you're looking forward to buy a house in Africa, buy from Kofi, put your money in Kofi's business, and Kofi will definitely give me a cut. Kofi,
Why not? Why not? Why not?
Wonderful. Nice way to kick off. Kofi, why don't you go ahead with your minute of commentary, and then.
Great. So I'm at Park. It's a 200 unit townhouse development, and I think the interesting thing, given this panel, is that my partners it's an African American led firm. So the CEO of the company is a woman by the name of Cheryl Mills, and we partnered on this development. We bought the land. They brought capital and expertise, and 4 years after the fact, we've sold all 200 units. So it's a $30 million development, and it really is a testament to collaboration between Africans, continental Africans, and the wider African diaspora. I'll leave.
Wonderful. Thank you for that 2-minute presentation. Jerome Mcpherson, do you care to give us your 2-minute intro?
Great. Thank you. Thanks once again, Janine, and thank you, Eric. My name is Jerome Mcpherson, and I have lived and worked in South Africa for the past 23 years. My background is in investment banking and law. In addition to being a founder of the Center for Disruptive Tech, what I really like to share with you, and I loved Rose's opening remarks. She talked about mistakes, calling, and what's in the gap. Today, I am a co-founder of what has become one of the largest women's infrastructure investment groups in Africa. www.wind.africa, W-I-N-D-E. I'll put it in the chat. And the way that we were able to fund this investment group was from the ground up. I sometimes talk about the story and I call it Sisters Doing It for Themselves, because we were able to bring together over 2,000 women, small and medium enterprises, by leveraging the numbers and the power that is within industry groups. So we got women in construction, women in logistics and transport, women in engineering. And basically what we did was we got these women together and they put their money together. And we bought into our first deal. And then we were able to shape procurement policies. We were able to really begin to not just to drive meaningful participation in renewable energy, water, construction, the industrial sectors that are related to infrastructure, but we were able to create over 2,000, thus far today, over 2,000 sustainable and quality jobs, but we've also measurably impacted the lives of over 1.8 million people. And so my calling is to be a transformation agent. And that's incredibly difficult because, you know, when you show up, you know, years ahead of the market and you are having to tell a complex story about why women should be participating more meaningfully in these sectors and how women's economic empowerment leads to community transformation, and people are like, we just want to do this deal and we're not interested in your story, it's really, really hard. So Michael and other folks who've been knowing me for years know that I have been in capital raising mode for all of my adult life. So what are the lessons? Hashtag do the work. You probably have never even heard of the Wendy Consortium, and we're one of the biggest. We keep our mouths shut and we get the business done. It's not about being on a platform all the time, it's about getting the work done. The power of the crowd is the last thing I will say. We are now at a place where we can leverage our balance sheet and raise hundreds of millions of dollars because that's what it is required to to play in the spaces that we play in. But we're only able to do that now, and it's almost 6 years later. But we were able to really, really leverage the crowd, and we were able to do that without USAID was previously OPIC. We knocked on every door, and people didn't understand a social impact company operating in the infrastructure space. And so we were sisters, and we did it for ourselves. The last thing I will say in terms of a really important lesson that I've learned, it is the lesson of running with a tribe of wise warriors. Not only are we a tribe, we don't always agree, but we stay together. But the last thing I will say is that Wendy Lahabe is the former First Lady of Gauteng, which is a province in South Africa. And it didn't matter how many credentials I had or how much capital I had managed as an asset manager or a former investment banker. What was required was that I needed to have the right champions on the ground in Africa. And she was and is an amazing, formidable person in her own right. So whatever it is that you're thinking about doing, think about starting with the money and the idea, but you're calling, but not be afraid to make those mistakes. We knocked on a lot of doors and everybody said no, so we did it for ourselves. But have the right champions to run with you, because it really makes all the difference. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sharon. Michael Sudakaso. 2 minutes, please. I think you
Good morning to those in the U.S. and good afternoon to those on the continent. Thank you, Eric and CFA for the opportunity. I am, like Sharon, an attorney by training, but I've been an economic development practitioner for the preponderance of my career. And I head an organization called Africa Business Group, and we're really a strategy firm. We've done work, and I actually started out with a company based in Washington, D.C. called 21st Century Africa, working with mid-cap companies who wanted to do business on the continent. And we started that way when I moved to South Africa, and I've been here a little bit less than Sharon, 21 years now. But working for fees with mid-caps, I found quite difficult. And so we started advising governments and institutions that work with government. And that's really what we do now. We are based in South Africa, continentally active. But one area of interest that's always been interesting for me has been what the diaspora can do. And I thought that Rosa really set the scene. I wrote a publication back in '91, which focused on $1 trillion global African economic community. And looked at how we might leverage the spending capital of the US with the opportunities that exist on the continent. And 21 years later in the vineyard, it still has yet to materialize, but it still has all the potential. So I'm quite excited about our discussion. The points that I want to leave for those who are really interested in Africa, I also published a book called The Africa Business Handbook. It was kind of my signature business card in the 90s. Went on to publish a book that's available on Wiley.com right now, or Amazon, on investing in Africa, an insider's guide to the ultimate emerging market, is that we have to read more as African Americans who want to do business on the continent. The continent is ever evolving and quite modern and dynamic and complex today. And so, I always encourage folks who are in the US, who are interested in the continent, to think about engaging with Africans in the US. I always find it quite interesting. African Americans want to come to the continent to meet folks, and they live next to Sipo or Tunde or Baba right there. And it's not like that person is an expert on the whole continent. But to Sharon's point about having entree, they definitely help with entree, because you really don't get to the US to set up and become a citizen, et cetera, as someone who's not bringing it. And there's lots of publications about that. So I want to say, take a long view. This is really an investment play. I know Rosa talked about trade, but those of us who are on the continent and still, I'll call it in the vineyard, have taken a long-term view. It's a passion. It's more than I'm going to do a deal and tomorrow I'm going to take my millions and go to Jamaica and retire. It really becomes, and Rosa talked about the Balkanization of the continent. many different countries, many different languages spoken, political change, and you have to kind of adapt to all of that. So you really have to take, and the people from around the world, people talk about Chinese and others, they come to the continent, put down roots, and they say, I'm here. I'm not here for like 6 months or 12 months, I'm here. And we need to, in terms of African Americans who are interested in the continent, think a little bit more about moving to the continent with an investor's mentality, even if you want to do trade deals. I know my 2 minutes is coming up, Eric, but I just wanted to put, this is a trade and investment discussion. The investment is what will drive, I think, the way that we engage going forward. And looking forward to this conversation, and I'm hopeful that this is the first of many more.
Absolutely. Thanks, Michael. Thanks for that. Sheree Robinson.
Awesome. Thank
2
you.
minutes,
Can you
please.
hear me okay?
Yes, we
Yep.
can see you as
I'm
well.
just going to share my screen a little bit as I chat. So I think I might come from a unique perspective. First, I'm honored to be here. I remember when I was working for the World Bank and CARE before that, I would run to conferences to just catch what Rosa was saying. When I knew I wanted to build my career in Africa, many people, Mel, like so many people on this panel were the people I just looked up to and wanted to emulate in some way as I embarked on my career a decade ago. But I think after watching what was happening with AGOA, watching a lot of work on the policy and government side, I made a decision that my work in Africa was going to be as an entrepreneur. And I wanted to do something that took a lot of the energy and vision and goals that a lot of us share around connecting the continent and the diaspora through business, could do so at 1 million+ people scale. So I chose to build Tastemakers Africa. It's a travel and experiences platform. We'll probably talk later about COVID, but I chose to build a venture capital backed startup as a way to bridge the gap. I saw that we have been having conversations about bridging the gap for a long time, and we've done it with nonprofits and we've done it with government organizations, but I felt like true ownership happens through entrepreneurship. And I wanted to not only build an entrepreneurial venture that could scale to $1 billion company, but I wanted to bring hundreds, if not thousands, of African entrepreneurs along with me. And so we built Tastemakers as a peer-to-peer marketplace with support from venture capital investors on the continent, in San Francisco, and in New York. We started out doing small group travel. We pivoted to a full technology platform in 2018, and in 1 year alone drove $1 million into the hands of local entrepreneurs and individual partners. And it's been a really exciting journey that continues to grow despite what COVID has brought to us as a temporary pause. What I'd like to offer is that government interaction and sort of the large scale projects that a lot of these conversations talk about are one way to do this, but entrepreneurship and technology is another way to do it, and quite frankly, to do it without friction. I didn't know any investors. I'm a biologist that worked in Mexico City on a farm with the World Bank. Now I've raised $2 million, put $1 million into the continent as an individual entrepreneur, and should be on track to raise another 10 million and scale this business in 12 months from now. And so when we think about how we're going to engage with the continent, when I was a younger person in my career, I thought the way to do it was to work for these big institutions, have those big names behind me. And I slowly started to realize that my ability to impact to the continent would be supercharged by going outside of these organizations and working with people and really leaning into the human capital that's available on the continent and telling that stories to investors around the world. So I just wanted to offer that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sheree. I want to end with Alan. Alan Wilmot, please. Oh, I'm sorry, Wilmot Allen.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much to Mel and Janine, to CFA. I also want to acknowledge another influencer in my life, and that's Ms. Flora Lizer, who I met when I worked for the IFC, who continues to be a pioneering influence in Africa. I am Wilmot Allen, and I'm based in Nairobi. I've been on the continent off and on for the last 20 years, here in Nairobi for the last 5. And I think what I'll say in summary is what I've learned in what I do, which is 2 things. Outside of Venture Lift Africa, which is a new firm that is a transaction advisory firm, but also we have built a marketplace to connect companies here with trade partners, supply chain partners in the diaspora and more to facilitate and catalyze growth. I also wear a hat as a private equity healthcare investor. And what I would say is that I just learned over time just to bring what I have, all of my experiences with me, but to focus on supporting a more prosperous Africa first. Because I believe if we focus on that, we'll see the corruption issue diminish, we'll see better infrastructure, we'll see better regulatory environment. And ultimately, I think as a diasporan returning to the continent, I find that there will be a participation in that because our strategy is to create an economic bridge, a stronger one between the continent and Africa. And we see that there's a diaspora dividend, and that is this. When diaspora come into Africa, there is, I think, beyond an economic interest, a larger kinship that I think yields even greater dividends and has a multiplier effect because it gets you to go outside of expat enclaves into communities, into churches, into the fabric of society, which has economic value. And also what is more untapped, which is I think is really important for creating a more prosperous Africa, is building brands. African Americans in America and other diaspora build brands, whether it's through pop culture and rap songs or through social media. It is true. And so if we can assist in a greater way, by bringing African businesses into America, into the global sort of diaspora settings, I think that's how we both win. And so that's what we're focused on, this 2-way trade and investment initiative. And I think it's something that will result in a win-win strategy.
Wonderful. Thank you, Wilmot. That was great. So now we're going into the lightning round with rapid fire Q&A. I want to start off with Kofi. That video, there's no better way to shatter myths than to show a video with homes and not, Tarzan swinging from trees. And so my immediate reaction or my immediate question to you is, how did you pull that off? What was easy? What was hard? Where did you get the money from? And then more importantly, I want you to address this concept, the philosophy behind the build, the philosophy behind the park. Can you address that first and then move into the more quantitative questions? Thank you.
Sure. Let's start with
just 3 minutes.
Sure. Let's start with the concept behind what we put together. Essentially, it's a townhouse community, and because there's a limitation around infrastructure in a place like Ghana, it makes sense to maximize your space and really try and increase your densities. And we find that culturally, a townhouse really works in a place like Ghana because you can have that outdoor kitchen at the back. You can have a bit of space in front of your unit. So that it's a bit more palatable than the apartments or the flats. And we also left a large green common area in the middle of the park for communal living. So that's where you find folks spending early evenings. The children are there throughout the day. It's actually quite lovely. So that was kind of the philosophy behind the build. In terms of the challenges, the biggest challenge I've had over my 20 years in real estate in Ghana has been raising capital. And that's why I'm so excited about the diaspora story, because when you have African Americans who are tapped in to real money, it makes a whole lot possible. So our development was financed through a partnership with a company called Black Ivy. And that's been a huge game changer for us.
Well, wonderful. I also note, before I go, that you also in food and you deliver fresh food into the supply chain. Can you comment on that And what's the link between that and property, if there is any?
Well, as I think Sheree mentioned the point that there's spaces for entrepreneurs regardless of the macroeconomic environment. And once you engage in those spaces, you see opportunities. It's not possible to import a townhouse from China. So that's an opportunity for us as Ghanaian entrepreneurs. It's also not possible or economical to import a fresh tomato into a country like Ghana from Amsterdam. Although at the same time, Ghana and Nigeria per capita are the largest importers of tomato-based products. So we saw a gap there. We introduced some technology. We've been able to scale to a 5,000 square meter greenhouse, which is roughly the size of 4 Olympic swimming pools. So this is the opportunity that we saw, and we're looking to scale.
Wonderful. Last question on IE Mensa Park. Is it structured in a way that the concept can be portable? For example, if I connected you with the Minister of Investment of Guinea, where I'm from, could you build a similar structure in Guinea?
Absolutely.
Wonderful. I want to pivot to Michael. Michael, you're one of the leading thinkers in agriculture, and agriculture being a transformative force, the basket of the world. Can you comment on agriculture generally across the continent in terms of the opportunity, the constraints, and then pivot to your own experience in supporting that? Because I also know that you led a major effort in getting the African Development Bank to support a fund-of-fund structure to finance agriculture across the continent. Can you comment on that, please? 3 minutes.
What you really have, and I think you're spot on about the import of agriculture, roughly 60, in some countries up to 70% of the jobs on the continent are in the agricultural sector. You have a continent that has roughly 1.4 billion people now, which in the next 3 decades will double. And so food security is key. So there's tremendous opportunities in agriculture. I think the challenge in the agricultural space is that most of your farmers in Africa are smallholder farmers. So there's a huge opportunity if you can bring mechanization, if you can bring ICT and tech, if you can bring scale. The point that was just mentioned about greenhouses, changing the dynamic, because Africa is also being severely impacted by climate change. And so most of these farmers on the continent are farming in rain-fed manners using rudimentary tools. So aggregation, developing co-ops, turning those co-ops into companies and corporations is key. What I've found is that the players from the US that are in the agricultural sector tend to be large multinationals, Cargill, Agco, you have Bayer, who bought Monsanto. There's an opportunity, and there've been conversations, and it's been, I think, led to some degree by USAID, but I think there's an opportunity for it to be done directly for African-American farmers in the United States to bring the knowledge that they have in terms of corporate and commercial farming to the continent. Tremendous opportunity. South Africa is one of the leading farming countries. Kenya is another. Ghana is rising. Egypt is another in the north. But you still have, as was mentioned, in many countries, billions of dollars of food being imported because it's not being processed. The point that you mentioned leads to the other sector that's of import to us as well, which is energy. So half of the continent, 600 million people, do not have access to electricity. And so you can't avoid post-harvest losses. You can't process your food. You can't store it very well. You don't have a cold chain without electricity. So that's another huge area. In the past, we've reached out to the American Association of Blacks in Energy to see if there were stakeholders who'd be interested in that space. But you really need to support the agriculture. We're going to need more electricity, but it's a huge opportunity on the continent. We've worked with the Alliance for a Green Revolution in Africa for a number of years, helping to convene their large forum, which is a global platform for agriculture. As you mentioned, some years ago, the African Development Bank was interested in creating a $500 million fund of funds, and I was part of the team that did the feasibility study for that. The errant step that was made was that the fund manager chosen was a European fund manager that didn't have a footprint on the continent. And so the bank put in $100 million and they couldn't close the other 400 million. And so they gave the money back to the bank. So access to capital, which has been mentioned by a number of colleagues on the panel, remains an issue. But you know, in closing, to try and keep in line with your time, the point that Rosa mentioned about bond markets and a point that you've worked on, remittance capital through bond funding, really has to be something that in this next decade, we really take seriously and look at, because Africa does have growing and emerging capital markets. The Johannesburg Stock Exchange, where we are, is about the 9th largest stock exchange in the world. And so if we could form capital, there are levers and tools that we could use to address the issues that still exist on the continent in terms of capital.
Sure. Before I go, can you comment on the current president, who was then Minister of Agriculture in Nigeria, the transformative decisions he made that turned, for instance, the rice industry into a profitable endeavor in Nigeria? One, any comments on that strategy? And then number two, is that portable? Should all countries, should all 54 countries adopt the same strategy in order to address the food security, food chain supply, and similar issues?
Sure. And, you know, was Minister Adesina, now President of the African Development Bank, Adesina. I had the pleasure to work with him in that as the Grow Africa initiative called Grow Africa, which was the World Economic Forum and the African Union, as the Nigeria country rep at the end of his term, and see firsthand how he, you know, did a couple of things. One, he revolutionized with the use of technology, access to inputs for small farmers, because that was always a bottleneck and it was always a very political and to some degree corrupt exercise, so that the farmers in the areas that you want to vote for you are the ones who get the seeds and the fertilizer. And he created an online platform for that. He also, and this is the power of lobby, got government to say, look, we're going to buy only locally made rice. And so now again, he ruffled feathers, and the government ruffled feathers for all the people who were importing rice at that time. But that's a step that one has to take if you want domestic food capacity and food security, which was key. He also started an initiative to develop processing hubs that could be of service to hundreds, if not thousands, of smallholder farmers around these facilities. Again, the challenge on the continent from an infrastructural standpoint is that it's expensive to produce and process the kind of food that's eaten, because now you have a much more urbanized economy. So people want, and you have television, cell phones, et cetera, you want modern brands in food. And so to compete with that, you're going to need packaging facilities, you're going to need processing facilities. So he pushed the governments at the state level, the provincial governments, to set up these type of facilities so that you could actually have quote unquote modern food and even take traditional pallets and package them the same way that you would receive imported products. Wonderful. So definitely he left a legacy, and he's taken that to the African Development Bank and now trying to get other countries around the continent to have similar initiatives.
Two issues on that. Wonderful, Michael. Thanks for that great input. Two issues you bring up. One is the use of technology, and the other one is branding being a key component to consumption. I want to pivot to Sharon. Michael just brought up the issue of technology, and I love the title of the center that you lead, the Center for Disruptive Technologies. Can you comment on technology as a disruptive force, particularly in the context of development? We've seen leapfrogging and the use of telecoms. Is that portable elsewhere? I think Michael just showed that it can be done in agriculture. Have you seen it done elsewhere, or you work in other areas that you think could be transformative? Sharon?
Thanks for that question, Eric. As a matter of fact, the work that I started doing with women in infrastructure grew out of the work that I launched at the Center for Disruptive Tech. I teach project finance at the University of Cape Town at the Graduate School of Business. And about 10 years ago, I wrote to a billionaire in Silicon Valley, and I said, I want to come, and his name was Naveen Jain, founder of Intellius, And he was on the board of Singularity University. And I said, I want to come out to California because I want to go and I want to learn about advancing technologies, because I want to go back to South Africa, my adopted country, and I want to begin, you know, to really do things to invest differently in our capacity to not just be early adapters of technology, because that's one of the things that we do across Africa. If you look at Rose's comment about the mobile phone, I mean, years ago when I worked on Wall Street, I tried to raise capital to invest in mobile telephony licenses across the continent. People laughed at me and they said, well, this is more than 10 years ago, this is 20 some years ago. They said, Africans are too poor for cell phones, Sharon. get off your advocate. And so, you know, the rest is history. It's ridiculous, right? But what I will also mention to answer your question is, if you go back and you look at Professor Ndungu, who was and I hope I'm not butchering his name too badly, but he was the former governor of the central bank. Yep. If it were not for the pressure from the ground, which put pressure on him to be more activist as a Reserve Bank governor, and him relaxing some of the prohibitions which precluded mobile telephone companies from doing things that were previously within the purview of only financial services firms, you would have never had a Safaricom, right? You would have never had those billions, because that really led the way. You know, you would not have had this proliferation of mobile payment solutions. So it was a forward-thinking central bank governor who was under pressure to do some things to help people at the base of the pyramid. So yes, I do think so. But I think when it comes to advancing technologies, we've got to look at, you know, how do we replicate some of the success of the panelists here and begin to be innovative in how we really go about funding some of the startup ideas that we have on the ground, because I do believe that we can be not just early adapters, but I am convinced that we can develop new technology. So one of the things that I'm hoping that will come out of these kinds of conversations is interest in and a commitment to developing ecosystems that allow for us to continue to replicate the kind of success that you're talking about. I don't think Americans are any smarter than anyone else. As a matter of fact, anybody who spent a lot of time in the United States probably scratching your head and wondering, how are these people right? They don't even know, like, what, you know, you start talking about Africa, they're like, oh, I have a cousin that lives in Cairo. It's like, no, I live in Cape Town. You know, they don't travel, they don't know anything, right? But how do we keep getting innovation right in this country? So we adapt the technology in Africa, across the continent, but we're not creating the new technology. Why is that? That's because we've got some ecosystems, pockets of excellence that really, really work. I don't think it's about replicating what happens in Silicon Valley, but I do think it's about developing ecosystems, and we need to get clear about what that means and how we do it.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. I think you know, the key element there is, one, having the right regulatory framework, and then particularly having champions within the regulatory universe. Right? I mean, the governor of the Central Bank of Kenya was critical to M-Pesa, which ultimately came out of Safaricom. I want to go to the money man, as it were, in his resume. And if Rosa is still around, I'd love to tap into a question around churches and funding. But I want to go to Wilmot. Wilmot, your CV is full of research on sovereign wealth funds in Africa, on venture lift. Can you comment on this question of capital access, particularly when it comes to capital that is available so inside the continent, right? Whether it's sovereign wealth funds, pension funds, insurance companies, et cetera. What are the impediments? And then the second element to that is access to high net worth individuals, professional athletes in the African-American diaspora, and whether there are any case studies of success there that could be used by some of these panelists. Thank you. 4 minutes.
4 minutes, great. Let me start with the first one. I think that what we see in Africa is the evolution of institutional capital being deployed locally. It's still in its nascent status, and I think that has to play out. It has evolved in mature ways and things like SACCOs and CHAMBAs, cooperatives, if you will. Those are long-standing established institutions, community-based institutions that invest. Now, in terms of venture capital investment, private equity, obviously you have that money coming into the continent, but in terms of local sources of those forms of capital, that's still nascent. The other thing I do think that's really important is the type of early stage risk capital to support startups and innovation. And there are burgeoning angel investor networks, seed funds that are now propelling that. But I do think that that's another opportunity. And this is going to really quickly go to your second question. I'll come back if I haven't answered everything. That really does present an opportunity for more of the diaspora to engage. We want LeBron, we want our entertainers and our VC players to have an entree into Africa because there's a lot more opportunity. We're looking for Africa branded in line and in partnership with the diaspora companies that 25 years from now, we will say, wow, the African Facebook, African Twitter, with 1.4 billion people, there's plenty of creativity. I think the access to capital is just part of it. The other piece of this, I think, Eric, is very important, is management capacity. And that's another way in which the diaspora can help out. And we're definitely seeing that. One of our projects right now is to engage an organization called the Robert Twigel Foundation. Sue Twigel has been a really instrumental force in diversifying Wall Street. And there is a growing cadre over 20 years of Africans and people of color, including African Americans, who have strong financial expertise, who can help support, stand up, and catalyze better management practices, more experienced management. Because what happens is that when outside investors come to the continent, there isn't the sense that, okay, there aren't great ideas or product market fit has not been established. It's typically the fact that the management capacity doesn't really compete on a global level. And that's driven by a number of factors, but including that the population here is so young. When the median age is just 20 or 22 to 20 to 22, many of the young people, obviously didn't have the experiences that we've had. Leave college, you go on to work at McKinsey for 2 years, an investment banking internship. So that professional socialization is not there. Now, other networks are coming in and filling that gap, which is why we have, I think, in a place like Kenya, a growing angst about the disproportionate amount of capital that's going into expat firms as opposed to local firms. I say this all the time to not be discriminating at all. It's true in what we're seeing in the United States with women, but the more Black controlled capital you bring into the continent, the more that problem will definitely diminish. And so I'll stop there. If I didn't answer everything, I'm happy to go to a deeper dive.
No, wonderful. We'll have an opportunity in the Q&A session. I want to, I'm not sure if Rosa is still on, but if she is, quickly, Rosa, if you are, the church network, the church has a history of investing in Africa, particularly in housing. Can you talk about whether or not your network is looking at investments and a potential source of capital? I noticed that TWG is doing acquisitions and investing as well. I'm not sure whether that's linked to the network of churches that you lead, but can you comment on that, the role of the church with respect to investing, and then your own experience in terms of being a source of capital for investors? Thank you. 3 minutes. She's not with us? Okay, she's not with us.
Another meeting.
Okay, all right, no worries. I'm going to pivot to brands. Sheree, you are a portfolio of brands. Time and time again in this discussion, the issue of creating, supporting, growing African brands is big, not only in terms of changing the narrative, but in creating value. Can you comment about what your platform is doing in that space, and then with a particular lens on women and entrepreneurship? 3 minutes.
Sure. I think that, like, answering that question maybe with a little bit of a broader scope around partnership, a lot of what I heard folks saying were around how do we bring expertise that we have in the US around brand and branding and scale to expertise that happens on the continent and match those things at equal value. And so at Tastemakers, one of the things we did was build a brand. So we started 5 years ago. We built a really strong brand on African tourism. We created a narrative that went beyond safaris, and then used technology to drive that value that we created from a brand perspective into a business model that then brought up smaller tourism operators and individual artists, entertainers, you name it, bring them into the tourism sector. Because what we knew we needed on the continent was twofold. We knew that there was a disaggregated community of people providing really amazing tours and experiences on the continent. And we knew that there was a brand problem when it came to travel to Africa. And we knew the brand problem wasn't only harming the leisure travel industry, but it was also harming the business of investment in Africa. We knew that as long as people saw travel to the continent as a problem, all of these larger trade conversations are still impacted by those narratives. And so what we decided to do was build the brand, make it global, and build the infrastructure on the ground, something we hadn't seen a lot of. We either saw people working solely on the continent and sort of in a silo, but not having a consumer conversation or an investor conversation in the States, or vice versa. And so we built something to do both. And we did something that particularly centered on women and young people. And so 70% of the people on our platform are under 30, or they are women, small entrepreneurs in the tourism and hospitality sector. What that has created in many ways is a snowball effect that has allowed us to become a much bigger company in a condensed period of time by using network effects in that business, but also by using brand and our foothold in the US as a way to attract capital. So, CEO of Expedia for 20 years is one of our largest angel investors, but so is the co-founder of Sundial. So we took African capital and high recognition US venture capital, put it behind a brand that we built grassroots, and then drove that capital into the continent, and are now creating parallel infrastructures in tourism that we believe in the next 5 years will outpace anything that governments can do on their own. And so it's been a really interesting way to, take a business model and use that to bridge the gap in a way that sort of feeds into itself in a virtuous cycle.
Wonderful. Thanks for that, Sheree. I want to switch quickly to Kofi, staying with the issue of access to finance, and then also on scaling. Can you tell us, how did you bump into Black Ivy? Were there other Black Ivies available that you pitched to? Is there a constraint there? I know that Black Ivy is anchored with Tony's money, but are there other similar platforms or networks or ecosystems that can be accessed? And then can you talk about scaling? Are you looking to grow this model in other places, either in Ghana or other places on the continent? 4 minutes.
Absolutely. So Eric, we've been in real estate as a family for the better part of the last 20 years. And what I found is that when you stay in the same spot, people know what you're up to. And so we've had hundreds of conversations with folks who are interested in bringing capital, learning about opportunities. Sometimes there's alignment, sometimes there's not. But if you stay in the same spot and you keep chipping away at it, we've acquired a lot of land in and around Accra. And have done quite a bit in the affordable housing space. So that Black Ivy, they were looking for a partner for their residential real estate division. And there was a lot of alignment in terms of their vision and our vision, as well as the asset. We brought the land into the partnership, which is a really tricky, the whole land tenure issue in Ghana is a very thorny issue with double sales and not a lot of transparency on the titling process. So we've dedicated a lot of time to solve that issue. And I think that's what's given us some traction with folks like Black Ivy. And I think that's probably one of the, Rosa didn't mention it in her submissions, but land and land tenure and it's a big issue for investors, and it certainly impacts a whole number of businesses. So we chose to focus on that. There are increasingly more folks that are interested in trying to become part of the residential real estate story on the continent. I field a lot of inquiries and calls on the issue. What I'm doing personally is we're actually pivoting towards an affordable housing product. I think that there's a huge amount of pent-up demand, both in terms of in the diaspora as well as in country, for homes that are probably just under $40,000. So given the whole COVID situation and the changing landscape and the real estate market, that's where we think there's going to be continued demand.
Wonderful, thank you for that. I noticed in one of your, I'm speaking now to the entire panel, there's reference to healthcare. I want to touch upon healthcare. Can someone raise their hand if you have experience, either tech applied to healthcare or venture capital applied to healthcare? I was trying to find my notes, but actually it's Wilmot. You have experience investing in healthcare. Can you talk about the healthcare space in Africa and how, what are the opportunities or challenges? Where is capital coming from, if capital is coming from? I've seen a few deals come across my desk. Happy to comment on those, but could you chime in on that, please?
Yes, we sometimes hear and overuse the slogan, Africa's open for business, but definitely when it comes to healthcare, that's the case. There's a tremendous need for strengthening healthcare systems. Most of the money coming to healthcare comes from the donor community, Gates Foundation and others. IFC has been a staple contributor and investor in healthcare. The good news is now, and CFA has actually hosted Dr. John and connected, actually was the source of my connection to the African Union Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The new Africa Public Health Foundation is commissioned to raise $1 billion to provide grants. I had the good fortune of being a management consultant on that project to design the strategy, as well as the operational plan and funding strategy and funding program. And the goal would be also to combine in a blended capital sort of way, grant capital with private commercial capital with other private equity funds to do so. My affiliation with the RH Manager Group in South Africa, I think what's important to note there is that there is an opportunity now in healthcare across the board, whether it's acute centers, hospitals, clinics, manufacturing, education, and one of our strategies is actually fundraising through the capital market. So listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange as well as the Rwanda Security Exchange. And I do think that there's an even bigger opportunity in med tech, and we're seeing that now in terms of distance medicine, in terms of enterprise software applied to hospital and care management, distribution platforms that are tech-based for pharmaceuticals. So there's a lot of innovation happening, and obviously the COVID pandemic has accelerated that. And I think in a noteworthy way, it's on the African continent, innovation by necessity. And so we're seeing a lot of that, particularly among young people. And to support that, there are a growing number of accelerators and incubators that are focused on health tech.
Wonderful, thanks for that. Last question, and then I'm going to make because I see in the comments, people wanting me to make comments on Diaspora Bonds and on the HomeStream's experience. I'm going to go to Sharon, again, on this disruptive technology, particularly as it is applied to education. We see education is now becoming a quote unquote profitable industry with Bridge Academy, a few other platforms, Enka Education, quite successfully launching their private equity investment platform in the French-speaking area with the baccalaureates, and then obviously the Leadership Institute out in South Africa, run by, I can't remember the gentleman's name from McKinsey. Can you comment on the space? And yes, exactly. Can you comment on the space and particularly the use of technology in the space? Thank you.
Yeah.
3 minutes, please.
Okay, I'll be very brief. One of the things that we started doing at the Center for Disruptive Tech, because I teach at the tertiary level, is we started getting these calls first from people within the UCT ecosystem saying, our funding model isn't working, education is broken. In South Africa, at any given time, you have more people graduate, you have more openings for positions than you have people graduating from college. But we have youth unemployment rates of really more than 60%. So something is clearly not working in terms of education, which was, in my opinion, fundamentally broken before the coronavirus hit, right? And so one of the things that we started looking at way back in March when I was still in South Africa, we started hosting these kinds of virtual town hall meetings, bringing together government, ed tech innovators, investors, et cetera, to say, how do we build back better? So one of the things that we're going to be doing at the Center for Disruptive Tech is launching a new we initially will raise about $100 million to fund future education, mostly focusing on ed tech solutions. The fact of the matter is that I believe that we will not go back. We will never go back to being able to just educate people the way that we were doing before. Why should we? It wasn't working before. Why would we be insistent that we're going to go back to something that was broken? So we've got to have a mindset shift. There's a lot invested in the factory system. But I think across the continent, we have an incredible opportunity, the youngest, fastest growing, et cetera. All the reasons why mobile makes sense, why telemedicine makes sense is what we're going to see in terms of some of the same drivers for how we reimagine education. The future of education is mass personalized learning. And I believe that the same way that we've been early adopters across a number of different technologies, we are going to see us become early adapters across particularly sub-Saharan Africa with respect to ed tech technologies. You think about the number of kids who don't have the capacity to do what we're doing right now. They don't have access to data. They don't have, a stable supply of electricity. So how is learning happening in those homes? So I've lost a lot of sleep during this pandemic because what I see happening is the bifurcation of African society. I see private school children whose parents have the capacity to continue to have learning happening at home, going this way. They have access to technology. They have access to resources. And so learning is continuing to happen in their homes. But what we're seeing at the Center for Disruptive Tech is we've got to figure out ways to help those at the base of the pyramid with solutions that are scalable, that deal with all of the real life challenges that they have on an everyday basis. And I believe that there's not only a gap in the market, but I think that there's a market in the gap. I love some of the things that Sheree's been saying. I think that there's a market in the gap, and I'm going to be focusing on education going forward. So I don't know how you knew that, Eric. So thank you for that question. And my goal is to help 1 billion people by reimagining learning and to charge them $1 each.
Wonderful. Wonderful. That's a fantastic vision and eminently doable. Because of tech. We're coming to the end. I'm going to make a few comments because I saw, as I said, the questions coming. So Homestrings just quickly started out as a crowdfunding platform in 2011, and the whole idea was to connect the diaspora to development opportunities back home, meaning in Africa. And so we structured the first Diaspora Bonds, medium-term notes, meaning no longer than 5 years, on the platform. We're very successful. We couldn't do it in the US because the regulatory environment was extremely hostile to introducing private opportunities to retail investors, and to register as a broker-dealer and do compliance, regulatory compliance properly as a startup was a death nail. So we moved to the UK, where the fintech environment was very, very helpful. I remember once getting a phone call from the UK Treasury asking me for tea at 4 o'clock so I can explain to them what we're doing. And at first I said, do I need to bring a lawyer? Because I'm American. But anyway, the the key constraint on home strings was that the UK market is very small, 44 million people, about 1.5 to 2 million are African, and then about 60 to 80% of those are not accredited investors. So we were really limited, and the US didn't really implement the Jobs Act, which opened up retail investment into private transactions until recently, and even so, is still constrained. So we pivoted and did something else. With respect to diaspora bonds per se, I think the World Bank has been, the lead gospel proponent to this. I have issues with it, in part because of the regulatory constraints. I think that the better solution is to go through banks. Banks have a universal appeal, irrespective of your regulatory classification, and so therefore banks, particularly African banks, can reach out to Africans living abroad to open up accounts back home, and then through those channels can invest in a broad range of products that could be listed or unlisted without having host country regulatory constraints be imposed. Last lightning round, 1 minute each. Could you talk about COVID's impact on your business, if any? I'll start off with Michael.
Right. COVID has been, I think, most impactful to our business in that I haven't traveled since late February. And my business was really built on often being in the place with the client, with government, with stakeholders. The thing, though, is that because my family is in the States, I was using Zoom 2 years ago. So it was a quick pivot. The family, the company now works remotely. I'm questioning why I keep paying that rental every month, but I do, because it's not really, in that regard, we do knowledge product things. But the things, if you're an investor, and the side of our business is focused on renewable energy, those projects ground to a halt, and they're very begrudgingly moving forward because you got to get to site, and if you can't get to site, we're stuck. We also work with young agripreneurs, young people involved in agriculture. Many of them took a hit. They were essential workers, so they could work, but when the retail stores closed down, and they did in different countries, they didn't have a market. There were those who were involved in export. The airlines closed, and the airports closed, so they didn't have a market. So it has had a tremendous impact, I think, because Africa really has been less hit from a personal tragedy standpoint than many parts of the world. South Africa is probably the most hard hit, and we're still, legions below the US, Italy, and some of the other places, but the economic impact will be felt for years. Sheree talked about tourism. We work with a group in Cape Town and organize something called the African Tourism Investment Summit. That was canceled. We're going to try and do it again next April, but it may be online. So, if you're in the tourism space, and tourism is a huge, Sheree understated the impact of tourism in Africa because it's an export product. Most of the sales are in dollars or euros, and your basis is in local currency. So tremendous amounts of monies are made in tourism, but the world couldn't come to the continent. The upside to me is hopefully there'll be more intra-African tourism, so that, and the products will be pivoted towards Africans traveling in the continent. But it has had that impact, and I'm more concerned about the next 2-3 years in Africa, because there are countries that had to take loans to meet their balance of payments as they have to pay for those loans. Right. The oil price went down very low, and many countries on the continent are oil revenue buoyed in terms of their economies. People stopped buying. China took a little bit of a hit, so wasn't importing as much natural resources from the continent. So all of those are knock-on effects that, right now we've been managing because the focus has been on the human side, the health side, but the economic side is going to be big. For our business, we're in the development space, so there'll be a continued need for support for the development. So we are getting past clients calling us to do work. So it hasn't really hurt in terms of our ability to do work that way. But anything that involves us physically traveling like we used to has been put on hold.
Sure, understood. Sheree, can you comment, COVID impact on yours? Sheree, you're muted.
Yep, sure. So I think twofold. Obviously, it fundamentally changed the present direction of the business. So Tastemakers, firmly seated in tourism, closed a funding round late 2019 from the investors I'd always dreamed of, went into 2020 thinking expansion, we're going to go toe to toe with Airbnb in this market, ready for the world. COVID obviously brought all of those efforts to a halt. But the silver lining in it was we realized that as much as Tastemakers, and this kind of echoes some of the things Michael was just saying, as much as Tastemakers is was a tourism platform, we also realized that by choosing the route of technology, choosing the route of being venture-backed, choosing community as a central element in how we scaled the business, we were actually able to have much broader conversations with our consumer audience and our supplier audience than travel alone. And so we ended up launching a conversation series called The Thread during COVID. To date, nearly 10,000 people have joined it, celebrities, entrepreneurs, government folks from not only the continent, but all around the diaspora. And we realized we had a much bigger voice in the Africa space than just centering on travel. And as a result of that, we ended up launching a monthly membership subscription that we see now as being a way we really activate our audience. We were reaching 100,000 people a day, but only a few thousand a day were maybe on a tour. And so we realized we have a huge opportunity to take a platform approach to our business, to actually service our community and our audience, which, when you look at social, just was much larger than what we could deliver at the scale we were as a travel company. And now we're taking that into our future business and using it in parallel. And so the way we see ourselves as we grow is not just a travel company, but an experiences company that takes people on their journey and connecting with the continent from the point of curiosity all the way through to the point of investment, and looking at that life cycle of our customer and our member through the lens of products we launch to serve them at each point of the journey. And that's been really, really exciting. Our board and our investors have been excited about that traction. And I think it really speaks to the dynamism of what you can do on the continent and what happens once you build a proper consumer and supplier community. You can do things that allow you to be nimble.
Sure, absolutely, wonderful. Thank you for that. Kofi, your input on COVID?
Quick 3 points. The first one is that land and real estate in Ghana, we found, actually works as or functions the same way that gold does in more developed markets. That people rush in times of uncertainty as a hedge against maybe inflation or currency risks. So we've actually found an uptick, which came to me as quite a surprise. The second point is that our marketing efforts have also really improved and increased over the COVID period, just leveraging folks like Watermaya, who has an incredible following on YouTube. I think we've probably had 1 million views on, or probably maybe even more than 1 million, maybe 2, and some of our social media outreach. And I think a lot of that had to do with the growth in African platforms during the COVID period. And the last part was even in terms of just the mechanics of a real estate transaction, that it wasn't very difficult for us to just pivot into virtual inspections with our clients that are based in the States, so that they could walk through their units and close, even though they weren't able to take over the houses in person. So on the whole, it hasn't really been writ large, not quite a negative. In some ways, there have been positives to the situation.
Wonderful. Wilmot, you want to close this out?
Sure. 2 things I'll say. In terms of healthcare, obviously it's put a premium on acumen and experience in investing in healthcare. which has been a positive. With regards to Venture Lift, it has been sort of bittersweet. We have, and Eric, I want to tip my cap to you and salute you for your great demonstration effect and pioneering work with home strings and the diaspora with fintech. Since we were incorporated and really got going last year with Venture Lift and still have about a quarter of a mile to go. But now there's more competition with online deal sharing platforms because everyone understands you're going to be more limited in traveling. But the boom I think what's been good for us is that we are next week, and I put this in the chat, having a Diaspora Investment Trade Deal event where we have a partner in the MBDA Export Center. It's going to focus on deals. And so it makes it cheaper to have these types of conversations. People don't have to jump on planes and come, and you don't have huge expense budgets for conferences right now to convene people, many of whom haven't been the first adopters, right? So they have to be convinced about coming to the continent. So I think it's been good also because it's gotten a lot of us out of our comfort zone as entrepreneurs and as investors to kind of rethink models. I like what someone said, to understand where the market in the gap is. And so I think that is a plus. And what I'll say, if I am concluding, is that, I think that we are definitely stronger together. And so I just encourage us. I come to a lot of these panels, we speak and we depart, we never exchange information, try to collaborate. So I just want to ask that if we can support each other, that we continue to stay in touch, because we're allies. We have, I think, supplemental companies and complementary assets. So thank you.
Great point. On that, before I close out, just to leverage on that idea, maybe this is an opportunity for CFA to create a group on LinkedIn with all the panelists and the participants of this, the 100 or so participants in this conference, to join that group and actually share and discuss and continue this conversation, and therefore solidify the network that you're talking about. I want to say thank you very much to this amazing panel, and obviously to Rosa for that amazing kickoff. I'm not sure whether we can do this, but if we can all turn on our microphones and do a little clap for this amazing panel, that would be great. I'll lead on here, just for a couple of seconds. I think it was amazing. I'm going to open it up for I think 5 or 10 minutes of questions. And I'm not sure if Janine wants to control that, or do you want me to control that, or who wants to control the Q&A? I'm happy to do so from my panel here. But we're now open for Q&A. If you can send it via chat, then it would be read, and then the panelists can answer. So I'm opening up my chat right now.
Maybe Eric. We're tight on time, so maybe just about 2 or 3 questions.
2 questions. Okay, wonderful. All right, I see one coming through. This is from Claude Beauregard. What is going on with technology transfer? Oops, sorry, did I get that wrong? Yeah, so okay, so what is going on with technology transfer to the region? One thing that is done in the West and China is that corporations or individual groups of investors will purchase undervalued companies in other countries and transfer the technology back to their country to help enhance or develop new products or startups. Why is this not being done in Africa, even in countries where there exists the infrastructure to do so? 1 or 2 comments on that?
I would just say that I think there's a lot more happening on the continent in terms of technology transfer than we may be aware of. And again, I didn't mean to be flip, but there are diasporans, so we've got African Americans who came over, involuntarily, and then there are Africans who emigrated to the U.S. over the last 2 decades voluntarily. Many are involved in ventures back on the continent where they are leveraging technology in the U.S. and bringing it back to the continent, and then some, like the founder of the company that was mentioned that was in the hair care business, is leveraging technology or know-how from the continent and selling it in the U.S. So there's two-way technology flow. Obviously, a lot more could be happening. But the point that I mentioned about people thinking about coming to the continent with a long-term strategy, meaning moving here, helps facilitate that, because you really need to have a trusted partner on both sides of the ocean for that technology transfer to really happen fast. I think it's starting to happen in Ghana with people coming from the African-American community moving to Ghana. Some are starting to move to Kenya. Some are starting to move to South Africa. And you're now seeing that happening, at least within the African-American community. Corporate America has been doing that for some time.
Wonderful. One last question. I have several that came in. I need to pick one. Let me see. I think I'll pick this one because, in fact, we didn't specifically focus on it, although we did in passing. From Mayo Johnson, what role does the African Union or any of the other multilateral institutions on the continent have done in terms of collaborating with the diaspora? Any comments on that? Anyone? No?
I mean, I'll just say that, as many know, that the former ambassador from the African Union to the United States was a very strong advocate of diaspora linkages as one initiative. Wilmot just mentioned the CDC initiative, which has embraced CFA, I know, and other African Americans to help that initiative happen. So the African Union is starting to recognize the diaspora as the sixth region and really put some resource to thinking about how that happens. Their citizens office, CEDO, has led that effort. They've been for years looking at the Caribbean, but they're also now trying to reach out to the African American community or the community of Africans in America.
Eric,
go ahead.
I'll build on this because I think for me, this is very important. And it's something I call a mutual karibu. Karibu is a Swahili word for welcome. Oftentimes what we don't get, Africans from African Americans, African Americans from Africans, is that welcoming. And so I do think for me, one of the most impactful contributions that AU has been what Michael has said, 6-region targeting programs at the diaspora as a demonstration, in fact, to say you're welcome. That is not oftentimes publicly said. Ghana has done that, but also from a policy perspective, and now channels and approaches to actually structuring that engagement is also important.
Yeah, let me close out by saying that the African Union and the African Development Bank have African diaspora investment initiatives. I sit on the steering committee at the African Development Bank, and I know that they're scouring the world looking at different diaspora models that they're going to create, that they're going to use to create a toolkit for the sovereigns and the municipalities and small businesses to tap into that capital. And then on the AU side, there was an assignment recently on setting up a diaspora investment fund, which will, again, use various mechanics to mobilize capital to invest on the continent, infrastructure, small businesses, healthcare, et cetera. On that note, I thank everybody again for participating, and I will pass the mic back to Janine to close out.
No, thank you all. This has been really very informative and very insightful. And I think that, well, I was going to talk about it in closing remarks, but Eric, the point that you made in terms of how to consolidate the information as well as the human resources that we've gathered here today, looking forward to have some type of a LinkedIn platform or some type of platform where we can continue this important discussion. But we'll pick that up in my closing remarks after, because I know we still have one more panel. So I'll turn that back to you right now.
Yeah, just one more note. If you want to save if you tap, you want to save the conversation in addition to the recording, simply open up the chat, go to the right, there's a 3 ... open that up, and at the top it says save chat, and you can then go over the questions and the exchange on that level. I think we're done. Are we moving to the next one right straight away? Right, wonderful. Yes. CFA has me working really hard. All right, great. Our next panel brings together, I think we touched a little bit upon the issue of of agriculture. And I think I saw in the chat, there were some remarks around cannabis. Now we're going to delve straight into the industry of cannabis from two luminaries in this area, with deep experience, on the ground, nuts and bolts experience in this area. And they are Mr. Forrest Branch, Group Managing Director of Colagri, who's based out of Namibia and the DRC, and Mr. Darren Hickman, who is CEO of AfriHelios, who's out of South Africa. I will give them a chance to talk about their backgrounds in the opening format. And then again, this one involves us two individuals, so a little bit more relaxed in terms of the time. And so maybe Forrest, you want to start with your intro?
Sure, thank you very much, Eric. I'd like to start out by thanking my longtime colleague and former boss many years ago, Melvin Foote, and also Janine Scott for allowing us to participate on this panel. So very quickly, I have been working in Southern Africa for 31 years. I have been based in the Republic of Namibia. I think by the end of this September, it will be about 26 or 27 years. And I work in the finance and agribusiness space. And just about 99% of what I'm engaged in is on the ground. So I am in intra or inter-Africa markets in the agribusiness space. In Namibia, I think back in '95, I was able to put funds together to draft what is now known in Namibia as the Namibian Green Scheme, which is their defensive, or I should say offensive agribusiness strategy, which is principally import substitution, which has gained a lot of traction. If you look at the 16 countries that make up the SADC region, the Southern Africa Development Community, about 12 of those countries right now are engaged in import substitution, primarily in agribusiness. And this started years ago in 2003. I think Mozambique passed some legislation. Our industry right now, Africa-wide, is valued at about $750 to $800 billion. And it's growing at a compounded average growth rate of about 7.5% per year. In the Democratic Republic, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, about 3 years ago, we launched a company called Colagri, which is Kolwezi Agribusiness. And we're focused on agribusiness because if you know anything about the agricultural sector, you know that the risk is on the agricultural side, it's on the growing side. There's far less risk on the agribusiness side. So for the miller that's processing grain, wheat grain into flour, they're not dealing with as much of a risk or the same type of risk as the grower. We recently just got started, so as I'm speaking right now, our operation was interrupted by COVID-19. My supplier is based in Italy for the grain system, silos, AGI frame, and then our milling supplier is based in Switzerland, Beulah. And so Lombardy, Italy was, I think that was the epicenter of the early days of COVID-19. But as we speak now, materials and parts and machinery, drying ovens, all of that is being fabricated, designed and fabricated. And so that's put us just a little bit behind. And I anticipate hopefully that by the end of this month, I'll at least be able to drive back up to Kolwezi via Lubumbashi, as there are virtually no flights in Africa except Ethiopian Airlines, and there are a few charters. So to that extent, I would say what drew me to this continent, I think it's both, it is a calling. I felt a calling many, many years ago to come here, but I think that if I've had any success, it's been because of a pragmatic fit. So I am a Michigan farm boy, grew up on a commercial farming enterprise in Monroe County, Michigan. The whole gamut, beans, livestock, what we call small stock, particularly the pork industry, and maize. And so now in Southern Africa, what I'm seeing is that many of the countries that belong to the SADC region are taking very, very hard looks at the agribusiness value chain. And they're looking at the fact that it is not sustainable to import food, particularly when countries like the Democratic Republic of Congo have some of the best soil anywhere in the world, and they have rainfall, which is very similar to what you have in Brazil. And then, more recently with the cannabis industry, and I'll let Darren speak more to that issue. This was an opportunity. It's not a particular set of genetics in terms of seeds that I've had experience with, but the overall horticulture or cultivation, the idea that it was a cultivation investment was attractive to me. There's something called the Cannabis Equity. So we had to look at Cannabis Equity in terms of, some of the injustices on the US side, but the profit imperative, and I think mainly just ensuring that, just like NAFTA was delayed for maybe 2 years, so companies could properly position themselves to maximize profit within the NAFTA community. We also right now are very much focused on ensuring that we position ourselves properly within the cannabis industry in Africa, the legal cannabis industry, which right now is about $100 billion, but making sure we position ourselves properly so we don't end up being a primary exporter of a product and then someone else in some other region of the world takes the benefit from the retail end and exploit the value add.
Wonderful. Thank you for that tour d'horizon, Forrest. That was fantastic. I'll come back to you on a couple of issues you brought up, particularly with respect to your experience in the U.S. versus Africa. Darren, your turn. Can you talk about your background, your business, and then your perspective both on agribusiness and cannabis in particular?
Sure. Thank you very much, Eric, for that introduction. First, let me say it's really an honor to have been on this panel with some of the speakers before. Many I've known for decades and observed what they're doing. Others I don't know personally, but have seen from afar and continue to be amazed by it. So it's been great kind of sharing this virtual table, if you will, with them. As Eric said, my name is Darren Hickman. I'm CEO of AfriHelios Global. We're a startup company that's seeking to leverage Africa's competitive, natural advantages in cannabis to create a vertically integrated Pan-African company that will bring African and African diaspora products and brands to the global market. Originally from New York City, born and raised, former JP Morgan banker who started their sports and entertainment wealth management group. Kind of realized that I needed more to life and made the move to South Africa about 20 years ago. Although I've been involved or active on the continent in some capacity for over 30 years. In the time that I've been on the ground here in South Africa, I've led multiple startups, primarily in the financial services advisory space, but I've also done some work in film and sports. Recently joined the AfriHelios team, consists of 3 African Americans, myself included, and 4 Basotho nationals who saw convergence of a number of key themes that we felt made this an ideal time to really enter the African cannabis space. And I believe in terms of, with respect to the theme that we've been talking about, an interesting industry for African Americans to get involved and invest in the African cannabis space and to create and generate wealth. So that's something, along with Forrest, we've been focusing on. And just to quickly touch on those themes we've identified, and actually before getting into that, listening to the panel beforehand, I was amazed at the convergence of a number of themes and factors that the others were talking about that seem to overlap. Both the African cannabis industry, but our startup and many of the opportunities and challenges that we're facing. And so, we'll touch on some of those as we go through this. But, coming back to this convergence of themes that we identified, first, Forrest alluded to the growth of the industry. Just globally, the cannabis industry has just been growing at such an amazing pace. You're seeing this wave of legalization happening around the world. You're seeing, diminishing stigma around cannabis as people begin to understand the value and the breadth of applications that are available to, that come from the plant. Over 45 countries worldwide have either legalized or decriminalized it. In the US alone, 33 states have have legalized at least medicinal cannabis and 10 have fully legalized the industry. it's estimated that this industry is probably going to be worth 175 billion within the next 5 years. Expected CAGR, or compound annual growth rate, of 30%, not even including ancillary industries. You know, when you look at that, compare that to internet companies during their heyday at their peak back in 2000. That was about 10 to 15% CAGR back then. You know, the 30% gives you a sense of, you know, the potential for growth. So that's one key theme that we've identified. Another one is just around commoditization. As the industry continues to grow and the applications begin to expand, you're going to see more use of cannabis as an ingredient or an input in other products, whether it be food, drinks, health and beauty aids, pharmaceuticals. As an input, it's going to drive down the pressure on the pricing on cannabis, particularly like the basic extracts and the flower. So scale is going to be particularly important as that driving down of the cost continues to happen. And so as that focus on scale continues to happen, companies are going to start looking to low-cost countries and jurisdictions in order to be able to grow cost effectively at scale. That puts Africa or countries within Africa in an amazing space to benefit from that, which is really the kind of the third theme that we identified, just the emergence of Africa as a potential global player in that space. Because of the many natural advantages that Africa has, you know, it's positioned to be at the forefront. Already, people may not realize this, Africa is the leading consumer and producer of cannabis in the world. The reality is most of it right now is illegal. I think last year they produced over 38,000 tons of cannabis. Now you're beginning to see African governments have identified an opportunity as they're seeing the legalization happening worldwide and seeing the benefit, the opportunities in Africa's position as a low production cost jurisdiction to really start taking advantage of that in order to improve their tax base. So countries ranging from Lesotho, which is where I'll talk a little bit more about Afro-Helios in a little bit, but where our company Afro-Helios has our first license. Lesotho, South Africa, Zimbabwe, 7 or 8 countries are somewhere between, you know, full legalization or at least decriminalization in various stages of development. The natural advantages that I referred to before. I think someone mentioned earlier just the abundance of arable land on the continent. Right now, I think Africa has 60% of the remaining arable land on the continent. So you've got an abundance of land at low cost. Climate is ideal. In Lesotho, for example, where we have our first license, they have on average 300 days of sun. The great thing about that is what it does is it allows you to use more cost-effective methods of cultivation. In the Northern Hemisphere, you're often dependent on indoor cultivation if you want to kind of maximize production. Indoor production is quite expensive if you want to grow in greenhouse or outdoor. Because of the climate, often you can only get 1 to 2 harvests per year. In Lesotho, for example, because of that, you know, those 300 days of sun, you can utilize either outdoor or greenhouse, get 3 to 4 harvests per year. So it makes it quite effective per hectare. In fact, the name of our company, Afro-Helios, is actually a play on that. Afri for the obvious reason, and Helios, which is the Greek word for sun. Effectively, we are the African Sun Company. So there's that theme. And then the fourth theme that we identified, and we've kind of touched on this, and I think we'll talk about this a little bit later, is looking at the U.S. market particularly. In the U.S., which is going to be the largest largest market in the world, particularly once the legislative landscape changes at the federal level. Right now, African Americans make up only 4.3% of the legal commercial industry, despite us having been the focus and the target of the criminalization. We have not been able to really partake and benefit as much as we should in the commercialization and legalization. A lot of it has to do with just basic barriers to entry that we've talked about that exist in Africa, but also exist for the community in the United States, African American community, which is access to capital, for example. Because of that, many African Americans aren't able to access the industry. However, what we've also identified, and a lot of it is a function of kind of the social upheaval that's happening in the United States and increasing focus on mobilization of capital in the African American community, both within the community itself and externally. What it's creating is a greater focus on trying to create greater equity or increase or lower the barriers to access in the industry. We see increasing activity within the African American community and community of color in the cannabis space. You're already starting to see it now, particularly with high profile individuals, Mike Tyson, Al Harrington, John Sally, a number of high profile individuals who can hurdle that barrier, that capital barrier to entry, and have strong brands are beginning to access the industry right now. We see that being a huge benefit as the market continues to grow. And we've mentioned that I mentioned the commoditization earlier. Because of that commoditization, even though more African Americans are going to be entering the industry in the United States, if they're not able to create, bridge that gap and access what we call low production cost inputs. And I'll come back to that because I know it's very important that we need to be able to add value in the continent before export. But even with respect to that, I think it's still the same point. Right. If African Americans are not able to access and have a footprint in low cost jurisdictions, there's still a possibility of not having barriers in terms of being able to fully benefit from the industry. So, we've identified those themes and really are placing ourselves right at the nexus of that space. And so that's really where Afro-Helios Global sits. And we can talk about that a little bit more. Sure. I know you want to get into some question and answer, but our company is really moving aggressively to expand and create this Pan-African company. So as I mentioned, we've got a license in Lesotho, which is the first African country to legalize the cultivation, export, production and export of cannabis. We're in conversations right now to conclude a JV partnership that will provide us access in South Africa to 40,000 square feet of greenhouse in a special economic zone. That's Africa's first integrated perishable supply chain and has the most technologically advanced future farming platform on the continent. That relationship would be highly complementary for us, and we'd be partnering with Dr. Thandeka Kunene, who's considered the queen of cannabis on the continent.
Great.
We're taking a phased approach to our growth, initially focusing on the cultivation aspect and really bedding down that competitive advantage, and then beginning to move upstream move downstream from there. We're very early stage, as I mentioned. We're at seed capital phase. We're looking to launch our seed capital phase, combination crowdfunding, Section 506B in early October, with a very soon follow-on with our Series A to build out our infrastructure. We're excited about the industry. Again, we believe there's prime opportunity for African Americans to invest throughout the value chain on the continent and create a strong connection or bridge in the U.S.
Great. Thanks for that broad scope on the industry. I mean, there's between you and Forrest, there's a lot to unpack, and what I'd like to do is focus specifically on the opportunity in Africa, and then we can bring in some of the experiences from the U.S. The banking restrictions, for example, and how that hampers a source of capital, or for lack of a better words, the control of the cannabis or the so-called legal cannabis industry by the privileged class, if I may paint them with that brush, versus the legacy of criminality of the same industry on which they currently are profiting. But specifically focusing on Africa. It's great to speak to two investment bankers, because then you get to CAGR really quickly. And what I'd like to do is for Forrest to talk more about the cannabis value chain. Can you unpack that for us so we understand from agriculture to packaging to distribution. Where are the bottlenecks? Where are the opportunities? What are the potential products? What's the vision? Can you sort of cover that? And then I want to go a little bit deeper on access to capital, and then more importantly, the types of vehicles which Darren just touched upon, the types of vehicles to access this this industry.
I think the question is just kind of unpacking the agribusiness value chain. So, you know, you can't talk about the cannabis agribusiness value chain without just talking about the agribusiness value chain. The problems that we have, the challenges that sub-Saharan Africa faces with the agribusiness value chain are not new in the cannabis space. For example, here I am in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which my town, Kolwezi, has about 950 mines. Many of those mines are active. Yet for agriculture, agriculture makes up about 1.5% nationally of GDP contribution. It's a country that was 50 million people in 2000. 20 years later, it's 92 million people. And in this mining space, for example, we have a mineral called phosphorus. We are importing, for maize, I have to import NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, combination 10-20-20. I have to import that. A lot of that is coming from South Africa, but inputs into that fertilizer value chain are coming from Europe or the United States. The main problem is we cannot control the value chain. Our company's motto, Colagri, is strengthening Africa's agribusiness value chain until we begin to control the segments in the value chain which are more, and often in many cases, more valuable and more important than the end product itself. So this is the product, this is the challenge with the cannabis industry. We do not control fertilizer. We do not control seed genetics. We depend on DuPont, an American company in South Africa called Panar. There's some relationship there. I have to get my seeds from there. We don't have, Africa has lost, you know, at independence, within the first 5 or 10 years of independence, in Africa, countries had seed banks. So many of our countries do not have seed banks, and it's ironic that they're the very countries that have the biggest potential. Democratic Republic of Congo, Angola, and Zambia have the potential to feed all of Africa and Western Europe. That's a metric, that's an old agribusiness metric. So some of the challenges that we face around the cannabis agribusiness chain are, for example, we do not produce greenhouse technology. So we have a technology transfer issue. If I look at the curriculum of the University of Kolwezi, it is deep agronomy theory. I think that should be limited to just 1 year. Our universities across sub-Saharan Africa right now should be addressing the barriers that are preventing us from getting into the 21st century industries that are high value addition. And so as we've lost industries like oil, like minerals, cobalt, copper, we've lost those industries. Those value chains are hardened now like concrete. Here is the second opportunity for us to control a global industry, agribusiness, and we're looking at the agribusiness, the cannabis subsector. So where in Africa are the institutions that are leading institutions in terms of fabricating plastics and polymers and aluminum to build greenhouses, to build modern CO2 greenhouses? In Namibia, I worked with a company called Musa Capital. And one of my clients, Greencrest Farming, was in the end, we worked and we built the largest greenhouse in Southern Africa. Now the supplier says it's the largest in Africa, but where is that greenhouse coming from? Most of that technology is coming from Amsterdam, or it's coming from Tel Aviv, or it's coming from Germany, or it's coming from the United States. Until we start focusing on the real value of these industries, we will not control any aspect of the value chain. And so the entire value chain will be outside of our reach. One thing I would recommend to every minister of agriculture on the continent, and that is to look at the potential tax revenue of cannabis. Legalize it like Lesotho did. Lesotho government showed exceptional leadership in being first. They said, we're going to narrow these licenses for medicinal use, production for medicinal cannabis. And so let's look at that, and then let's unlock the entire industry so integration can occur. So we don't have factories building greenhouses. We don't have factories putting out latest technology for greenhouse management systems. You know, today I can use my cell phone. I can control a greenhouse in another part of the world. The humidity, the temperature, you know, all of those factors, what we call fertigation, you know, the combination of irrigation and fertilizer. I can control all of those, but I am 100% dependent on Europe and the United States and maybe Asia for every part of my value chain.
On that point, so sorry to interrupt. On that point, you know, the African Development Bank is led by a former Minister of Agriculture of Nigeria. Any initiatives out of the African Development Bank on the issue of seed banks, fertilization, and greenhouse?
That's an excellent point, because I think Michael addressed this earlier about climate change. So President Adesina of the African Development Bank, his legacy today, as we see it on the ground, is import substitution. Every country that I've worked in Southern Africa, well, 12 out of the 16, is heavily engaged in an active program of import substitution. Right now, coal agri is now becoming the centerpiece for food security in Lualaba province. And we've had people calling us from government, calling us from Kinshasa and Kisangani and many other parts of the world. In Namibia, I've been very active in something called the market share program. And it's a scheduled percentage of products that have to be purchased locally before imported goods can come in. So for a grocery store like Pick n Pay or Checkers or ShopRite or some of the other retailers in the region, before a truckload of carrots can enter Namibia, the last 30 days, 47% of what they are purchasing has to have been purchased from a local supplier. Now, Adesina's legacy is going to be that 10 years from today, we probably will not be importing wheat from Belgium into the Congo. We've isolated an area just for pilot purposes of 1,000 hectares. We've done the pH studies. We use Booker Tate and soil capital out of London and Belgium to do our soil studies and our market analysis. And we've discovered that we have massive potential to produce everything that Congo is consuming. We have 92 million consumers. Biscuits, cookies, biscuits they're called in Africa. How can biscuits come in from England and from Asia, and we can produce these things right at what we call the boulangeries, the bakeries within Lubumbashi and Kinshasa and Lualaba, you know, province? I think what we're going to see, and Rosa mentioned this too, we're looking at manufacturing. In the United States, manufacturing history is based on agriculture. The advent of the moldboard plow is what stimulated the steel industry for farmers and the transportation of food from region to region, from west to south, from south to the northeast. That's what spurred manufacturing. If you want manufacturing in a nation, you have to have an underlying agriculture or agribusiness industry. I cannot foresee, coming from Southern African region where I've lived for 31 years, and I have to buy silos from another part of the region outside of Africa. This is just fabricated sheet metal. And surely in our tertiary industries, institutions across Africa, we could teach something as basic as fabricating sheet metal to build grain silos. Understood. So we have a tremendous challenge facing the entire cannabis agribusiness value chain, because we haven't addressed the agribusiness value chain. Plenty of opportunity for Africans to control that space.
Understood. Darren, can you specifically talk about your fundraising strategy and why it is the appropriate strategy for both agribusiness and specifically what you're doing in the cannabis sector?
Sure.
And then related to that, you know, the difficulties that you potentially foresee.
Sure. You know, and I'll speak specifically to the cannabis industry. I think Forrest would be in a better position to speak to it more broadly in the context of the overall agriculture business, or agriculture. With respect to our strategy, as we've alluded to, access to capital is generally a challenge, particularly when you're dealing with a product like cannabis. There are just so many considerations, some still stigmas that goes with the industry limitations around some of the VC, the private equity VC funds that are out there that won't play in that space. So we've had to take a fairly unique approach to raising capital, and particularly being in Africa. Excuse me. The industry is still evolving in Africa. Initially, the big players moving into the cannabis space in Africa were the existing cannabis players coming out of Canada, who were publicly listed, who saw the opportunity, they saw the commoditization happening, they saw the potential growth happening on the continent, and they actively got involved. And they were driving a lot of the activity on the ground. So you had the likes of Supreme Cannabis, Canopy, Halo. Those guys were bringing capital to the party to get a lot of the early initiatives off the ground. Now that that phase has kind of quieted down, you're having to look at unique sources of capital. You know, we looked at institutional players in the market. We looked at mid-cap players, a number of different others, and still ran into some challenges. So what we decided to do, and it's also consistent with our goal to kind of democratize, if you will, access to the opportunity. We've decided to take kind of a two-pronged approach to raising capital that allows us to circumvent some of those challenges. So one, we're pursuing a crowdfunding capital raise process, particularly for our early seed stage. One of the things, because our team is both American and African, and our headquarters is set up in the US, it's allowed us to access crowdfunding opportunities that would not normally be available to a number of the other cannabis initiatives on the ground here. So, you know, we're leveraging that crowdfunding aspect. Then with respect to that Section 506B, what we've decided to do is to kind of leverage, you know, people have mentioned professional athletes and entertainers and a number of influencers like that who are beginning to enter the industry. We see a critical mass of opportunity there. They are looking to enter into the space often because cannabis in many ways fits with their existing brand, their existing personal brand. And to be able to show that, hey, not only am I entering the industry here in the US, I've made this bridge, this connection back to opportunities on the continent. And we're investing in it in its infancy stage, has become quite popular. So we're looking to, you know, pursue that path. And that's, you know, I mentioned the Section 506B. Those are high net worth individual accredited investors.
Yeah.
And so it allows us to access both accredited investors through that 506B, and then the broader market, where we, as I mentioned, we're seeing a lot of focus within the community on investing within our community. We're seeing a lot of people reaching back to the continent. Many people think about repatriation. How do I get involved on the continent? How do I invest? But often don't have access because they're not accredited investors, don't have the relationships.
Yeah,
and so, you know, we're using the crowdfunding to access that. Once we get to a certain stage of development, a certain size, because a lot of our challenges, we're a startup, we're brand new, and that's always a challenge. Once we get to a certain, you know, revenue stage, then we're able to access more institutional sources of capital and funding that then will then jumpstart our move downstream into other aspects of the cannabis industry.
Perfect, perfect. Forrest, any comment on funding, both at the agri level, at the agribusiness level, and then specifically in the cannabis subsector?
You know, one of the things that I discovered, one of the things that I discovered early on in Namibia, we had a case where in one fiscal year, Eric, something like, I think maybe $200 million from one of our ministries, it may have been in the late 90s, was returned back to the National Treasury unspent. And one of the things I've noticed is that there are countries within the Southern Africa region where if you bring innovative strategies, management capability, and if you can prove markets, and I mean scaled markets, funding is available. In some of these public-private partnerships, you'll find that government has mechanisms to, if nothing else, provide guarantees. So if they provide the guarantee, depending on that country's particular credit rating, credit profile abroad, it's a lot easier to raise capital. And if the other institutions, that funds of funds, the impact investment, that sort of thing, if they've approved, if they've signed off on the investment plan, on the business plan, and if you have a public sector partner that's willing to expose themselves to limited funds, you'll find that raising funds, there's a wealth of funding right here on the continent. There's a lot of inefficiency in the public sector in terms of ensuring that fiscal year budgets are fully spent for the 12 months. So I'm finding that if you bring innovation to a government, you go to a provincial government, you don't have to go to the central government and say, you may have a looming food crisis here because you don't have food security because of the following reasons. We're blessed in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and I say blessed because so many negative things are spoken over that nation. I'm in the South. I'm in the area, I'm in what we call the lungs of Congo. This is where the mining countries, this is the only reason you're carrying an iPhone today, because of our mineral wealth in the South. The roads are excellent. I just said that. The roads in southern Congo are excellent. The infrastructure is excellent. They have Detroit-style power infrastructure. I pay 3 cents per kilowatt. So we have everything there, for example, to have the best cold storage in the world. All I'm saying is sometimes it takes a leader. Sometimes it takes somebody that's pragmatic, that understands the industry, that loves the community that they work in, to show government, if you would just allocate 3% of your fiscal year's budget toward this, you could resolve a problem for the next 20 years. And so to answer your question, there is funding available locally from some of these mining companies that have done very well in their sectors. There's funding oftentimes specific ministries have challenges spending their fiscal budgets for the year. That can be a major problem. So we have to be innovative in looking for capital. The challenge with cannabis, though, is the legality of it. It's this wall, it's this barrier that, it's a sinful product. And in Southern Africa, it's largely Christian, religious ethic. And so we have to look at cannabis a different way. We have to look at cannabis as an input, the cannabinoid, the CBD, as an input to pain management, as an input to big pharma. And so this is Africa's opportunity to make a footprint, to establish a footprint in big pharma. They're not going to go on the stock exchange in New York and buy shares in pharma, but this is a game of strategy. And it's our opportunity right now to leverage our strategic positions with this new product before it becomes commoditized and we're not in position. So this is an excellent opportunity for us not to establish ourselves in the early stages of the cannabis industry, but we should be looking at pharmaceutical industry. We should be looking at controlling a huge market share of the pain management industry, which is what the CBD oil is purported to do.
Fantastic. That's a very good way to segue to Q&A. I want to thank both of you for an excellent overview, both in scope and in depth, of the issues around agribusiness, agriculture in Africa, and then specifically some of the difficulties and the opportunities around cannabis. And I completely agree with you that there's an element of advocacy, an element of branding, an element of repositioning in terms of capturing the opportunity there and potentially dominating the market. So again, thank you guys, and I'm going to be fair. I think
Eric,
yes?
If I could, I just want to acknowledge something, and I think this is an example of how two people can collaborate. There is a gentleman on this panel right now. His name is Jerry Brown. Okay. If you look for him, you'll see him on the screen. Jerry Brown gave me my first $25,000 when he was at USDA. I took that money, I hired a consultant from Ghana, from Jamaica, and a Zimbabwean. With that money, we were able to pick up another $25,000, $30,000. And today, Namibia's green scheme is in effect because of the small USDA, I think it was the Foreign Agricultural Service, FAS, grant that he gave to me when I was the country representative for Africa. So sometimes a small amount of seed capital can go a long way. And today, Jerry, I will have you know that out of the $1.4 billion a year that we spend buying South African products, 42 to 47% of everything we consume of the list of, I think, 20 control crops is being produced by Namibians. And I just wanted to give him a shout out, and I apologize for interrupting.
No, wonderful. I mean, that's a good context. It's also a great segue to questions. I'm trying to close out in the next 5 minutes so that Janine can close us out by 1 o'clock. I'll take 2 questions from this point on. 2 questions for both of our panelists. We've done an excellent job today in the agribusiness. I see one question coming from Claude. What effort is being made to have Africans work with African Americans with exporting agricultural products out of Africa to the US, for example, avocados from the DRC? Any comments on that? Forrest, I'll go with you since you're sitting in the DRC. Please make it brief.
Yes, sir. Look, I know of cases where, for example, cassava is being exported, as a tuber into the United States. And as you know, within the pharmaceutical industry, the pills, not the capsules, but the pills, the white pills, most of that is starch. And so they're being used as an input for starch. I would say, I don't know that there are many African Americans that are on the receiving end or collaborating in agribusiness. I know that I have had physical meetings with representatives of the Black Farmers Group in the United States. They're still dealing with court cases like Pickford 1 and Pickford 2. But I would say this, there are opportunities right now to increase the value addition or to innovate that cassava tuber into its near final stage expression for the pharmaceutical industry. And so instead of exporting tons and tons of cassava from Nigeria, we might want to look at processing that flour, packaging it in smaller units, and increasing the selling price by increasing the value addition.
Wonderful. Thank you. Darren, to you specifically, a question around, do you need to own the land to grow cannabis, in Southern Africa?
No, you don't necessarily need to own the land. It also depends on what country you're doing it. In some places, it's a challenge to own the land, but you don't necessarily need to own it. You can get long-term leases in some areas. In South Africa, you can own the land. It's easier. Okay. In Lesotho, you can own the land too, but I find that it's probably a little bit easier in South Africa. But quick, simple answer: no, you don't have to own the land in order to cultivate. Wonderful. Obviously, you need to consider, the amount of investment that you might be putting into infrastructure on that land if you're not owning it. Yeah, and I think you're also kind of, touching on some, potential risks that one might incur depending on the country in which you're cultivating. That's always going to be a consideration. And so you have to decide based on a country by country analysis and their particular laws around what's the best way to approach that.
Wonderful. Last question, and this is from our host, Janine. Speaking of pain management, is there exploration of our role in psychedelics, mushrooms, or other molecules geared towards pain and mental health therapies? To both of you.
I know from a consumer level, the University of Namibia has played an excellent role in the development of mushrooms. The agricultural school is referred to as NOIDM, the NOIDM Agricultural College. But again, this overriding legal framework prevents sufficient research and development, which leads to innovative products. If you look at a company like 3M, Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing, they have corporations within corporations within corporations. And those corporations are designed to lose money. Their goal is not revenue. Their goal is to deliver technologies that can be packaged and monetized on the global market. And I think, again, I think that those that are leading and championing some of our educational institutions, they have to come in line with the short life cycle in terms of the investment, the study, the R&D, and then the output of these new prevailing technologies. Look at Brazil and look at Central Africa. We have all sorts of biodiversity that could address the pharmaceutical industry. And quiet as it's kept under the radar, a lot of the core kind of organic components are coming from these countries. We had a group of Dutch, maybe about 5 years ago, just some young guys came from Amsterdam, paid a guy $100 in the Congo. They went to some river near Kisangani. They got this particular genetic of cannabis. It's the strongest in the world. They synthesized it and they patented it. And you'll know that the Dutch had an issue with Ethiopia a few years ago in terms of patenting the teff seed, which produces the injera. But I think that we are not, the individual regions are not talking to each other. ECOWAS is not talking to SADC. SADC is not talking to PDA. And within the regions, the intra-regional conversations are just not being had. This Africa-wide trade agreement is probably going to be one of the most important pieces of legislation in terms of shaking out anything that is non-productive on the African landscape. We have got to catch up and overtake the rest of the world when it comes to trade.
Wonderful. Great. On that note, I'm not sure, Darren, did you have something to add, or I can go?
No, I think Forrest covered it quite well.
Okay. Wonderful. Again, both of you, Darren and Forrest, thank you very much for this. This has been quite illuminating for me. I'm not an ag person, but I've learned tremendously, and I'm sure our participants have also learned a lot. I will hand over to Janine to close out. And again, thank you very much for this opportunity, and thank you everybody for listening in.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you, Forrest and Darren, for your presentations today and the information that you've shared with us. I think it's a sector that intuitively people know that there are probably a lot of opportunities, but I think they've not thought through some of the details and how they may become engaged. And I think you've given people, so to speak, a lot of food for thought, so to speak. So thank you for that. And Eric, you've done a heroic job this morning. I mean, you've taken us through the entire program, and I think you've been spot on with your leadership in guiding the discussions. And thank you again to all of the panelists who have just given us invaluable information. As I said earlier, this panel was geared towards looking differently at African Americans who are located in the continent and who are doing successful business enterprises out there, and to kind of provide information back to us in the diaspora on this side and incentivize us, if you will, to look at the opportunities and, yes, the challenges that may exist in terms of thinking of investing or doing trade with the continent of Africa. So you certainly have given us a lot to think about. But one of the things that I also took away earlier was in Kofi's video, where he was asked, Kofi, is Africa the future? And he said, no, Africa is now. And I think as we think about that, and we think about different ways for us to concretely engage back with the continent of Africa, to perhaps consider moving, to lay down more tangible, concrete markers on the continent for ourselves from this side. I think we really want to make sure that we take into account what has been said this morning. I have said that I don't want this to just be a one-off discussion. We always say we don't want this to just stop here, that we'd really like for something to come from this. And I think there's a lot to be said for us looking inwardly as African or peoples of African descent in Africa and in the US, to how we can thoughtfully engage and support each other in the work that is to be done. So I think we will be looking at how to form some type of a follow-up working group or something of that nature, whereby we can continue these discussions, continue these exchanges, and come up with something that may concretely help all of us as we navigate this road. Mel, I'm not sure if you have any other word that you'd like to chime in before we close out.
Yeah, of course. Let me say, one, this was the best business and trade and investment forum that I've ever heard on Africa. This is the best. And, whoever ever conceived the notion that Black people ought to talk to Black people, and anybody else who want to listen in, that's fine. But we're talking about the future of Africa and the diaspora, which I think is absolutely novel. Secondly, I want to say that freedom ain't free. Not only have companies suffered in terms of the COVID-19, CFA has really suffered. And so as you put your strategies together to generate resources, don't forget us. Like the goose that laid the golden egg. Don't eat the goose that laid the golden egg. In fact, feed that goose. And I say that in the sense that we know for a fact that CFA has always suffered from resources, partly because there are people out there who don't want us to succeed. They don't want us to have this kind of forum. And so I think we have to seize ownership, and we're counting on you guys to change the paradigm. We're doing what we can. This is the fourth of a 5-series, Ron Brown series this year. Actually, despite COVID-19, this has probably been our most productive Ron Brown series in history, partly because we don't have to get on airplanes. We don't have to feed people. We don't have to do a lot of things. We don't have to get a ballroom to have the meeting in. We're doing this on Zoom, and we got people in South Africa, Congo, Ghana, throughout the diaspora. We plan to do more of this. So I just want to say, now the final program is tomorrow at 10 o'clock. We're meeting with the Africa CDC. I know it came up earlier. John and Kingasong, who's my good friend, and we want to get an update from him as to how Africa is responding to COVID-19 and what role the diaspora need to play. So anybody who is interested should tune in. It will be a chance to ask some questions and to lay out some of the constructs about how you do business with Africa CDC. A lot of these. So I just want to say congratulations. Eric, you were excellent, as we knew you would be. Forrest is the most noble human being I know on the continent. And he's an honorable guy, he's a God-fearing guy. He was my deputy for a couple of years, and we don't make a move unless we talk to one another. So I just want to say thank you all for just a wonderful dissertation. I wonder where my PhD certificate is. I just want to know where's my degree. I mean, I should have an honorary degree after watching this here. So thank you all for the wonderful presentation, and we look forward to the follow-up. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bravo! Africa! It's time for Africa.
Africa!
Great job.
Great job, everyone. Appreciate all the great work. Excellent. Look forward to
Thank
more.
you very
much, everyone. Excellent.
Appreciate the blessing. You guys are tremendous. Great job.